And we are back continuing with the Department of Finance. And in reconvening, I remind Senators of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. Senator Hume, would you like the call?
Thank you. Yes, please, Chair. Before we left off, the folks that were responsible for the Australian Government guidelines on information and advertising campaigns by non-corporate Commonwealth entities were up at the desk. You thought you got away with it, but I'm afraid I'm calling you back. Thank you all very much. So I've got a copy of these guidelines in front of me, but rather than read them all out, I'm wondering if you can just let me know very briefly what the purpose of those guidelines are.
So, Senator Grant Lovelock, Acting Deputy Secretary, Business Enabling Services. The guidelines provide the framework under which government advertising operates. The two key things there being that there is advertising involved and that it meets the threshold of $250,000.
Okay, so under what circumstances is it permissible for a minister or for a Prime Minister to use any government services logo, like Services Australia or Open Arms or any of those, in public communications, and what circumstances is it not okay?
So, Senator, based on what's described, I don't think that would automatically be captured by the government advertising guidelines. And consistent with the arrangements in place for government campaigns and for advertising, it would be a matter for the accountable authority, so the agency head of the organisation involved, to determine whether it was or wasn't appropriate for those kinds of things to be involved in information dissemination.
Okay, so forgive me, I must be...
brand usage as opposed to government advertising, I think.
Branded usage, that's what I said, sorry. Didn't I? I said brands like Open Arms.
These are people, these are public servants who advise and support the government advertising campaigns.
So I asked about the Australian Government guidelines on information and advertising campaigns by non-corporate Commonwealth
Yes, but
entities.
brand usage is not an advertising campaign.
Okay, so Principle 3 in those guidelines says, in demonstrating compliance with this principle, considerations include, and the principle is objective and not directed at promoting party political interests. Language used in the campaign is objective language, free of political argument, and campaigns must not try and foster a positive impression of a particular political party or promote party political interests. Campaigns must not mention the party in government by name, directly attack or scorn the views, policies or actions of others, such as policies and opinions of opposition parties or groups, or include party political slogans or images, be designed to influence a public support for a political party, a candidate for election, a minister or a member of parliament, or refer to or link to the websites of politicians or political parties. So that's the guidelines I'm talking about, which are under your purview. Yep.
They refer to advertising campaigns.
Yep.
Okay, so where are we going with this? What's the campaign you're interested in?
So those principles, this is what I'm asking. And also interpretation 11, which I think is on page 4 from memory of, yes, there we go. Interpretation, I think it's actually paragraph 11. These guidelines are a government policy. Entities subject to the guidelines must be able to demonstrate compliance within the 5 overarching principles when planning, developing and implementing publicly funded information and advertising campaigns. The principles require that campaigns are relevant to government responsibilities, presented in an objective and fair, accessible manner, objective and not directed at promoting party political interests, justified and undertaking an efficient, effective and relevant manner, and compliant with legal requirements and procurement policies and procedures. I'm interested to know how the use of the Medicare logo at a Labor political rally complies with Principle 3.
Well, it's not an advertising campaign, which is what the guidelines...
So you reckon it's okay?
Well, I think you are mixing up the role and function of government advertising.
That's all right?
Yeah.
Under finances laws, that's all right?
It's a brand. It's using a brand which is not covered by the guidelines that you just read out, nor is it a publicly funded advertising campaign, which also those guidelines refer to.
What about the Facebook pages or the social media pages of some of the Labor Party candidates and members of Parliament and senators
They're not
that
government
also
advertising
use the
campaigns.
words Medicare, and then next to the words Medicare,
I know the Liberal Party probably
they
has
use
never
the phrase
done
building
anything
Australians'
that
future.
strengthens Medicare, so you probably never had a reason to use
thank you
it in
for
any
that
of your
snarky
material.
remark, but there's no need to get bitchy. I just want to know whether this is appropriate, and you're telling me it is. Is that right?
Well, I'm telling you, it's not relevant to this
Using
part.
the phrase and the logo of Medicare.
Senator,
your campaign
Senator Hume.
Well, if I could answer your question rather than making a video, which I'm sure you're making at the moment, is this section does not apply to the event that you are talking about on the weekend. It is not a publicly funded advertising campaign. It is not a public information campaign. And so your questions are not relevant to these officials or this part of finance estimates. If you have a problem with the Medicare brand being used, that is a matter you should ask Services Australia about, because they are the owners of the brand.
What are the consequences, do you think, for using a Commonwealth brand in advertising
Hume,
for a political party?
Senator Hume, this is not the
advertising.
place to put those questions.
Well,
so I'm going to ask you to
ask Services Australia. My advice, because I think this has been raised in the media, perhaps by you, Senator Hume, is, and the advice that Services Australia, as I understand it, sent to the journalist that asks, the agency is not concerned about legitimate use of its brands, for example, in public discourse or in a descriptive way identifying a program. We have no concerns with the use of Medicare brand in this instant, consistent with the agency's normal brand management practices. It is not misleading, misrepresentative, impersonating the Commonwealth or used in a commercial context.
So is it acceptable?
And I understand that, sorry, if I could just finish, I understand that information was provided to the journalists who had raised this in response to you raising it. But any relevance to government advertising and a public information campaign, which is what these officers deal with, is not relevant.
So is it acceptable then for a public information campaign to use the Medicare logo in a partisan way?
No, it's not, which is why the government information campaigns, as they have related to Medicare, have gone through all of the proper processes, including through the Independent Campaign Committee, and you've seen them on the TV. We've done some there's been a range of Medicare advertising campaigns, and they have met all of the tests and requirements of a public information campaign.
Okay, so it's not okay. That's good. Thank you. That's all I need.
Because that's
fine.
not...
We're done. It's quite good. You answered. Thank you. All right. I have one more question about the transition of operating to the SAP cloud-based system. I'm not sure if it's meant for DTA or whether it's meant for finance. I just don't want to get to DTA and realise that it's supposed to be for finance.
So what exactly is your question?
I just want to understand the oversight, whether finance has oversight over the whole of government ICT.
That would be DTA.
It is definitely DTA?
That is definitely DTA.
Okay, all right. That's fine. I will save that one for DTA and let you go. I just hope I don't get to DTA and realise it was you guys. But anyway, we'll work it out. Thank you.
Well, Senator Hume, also just to add, if you are going to mislead the answer I just gave, which it seems you are...
No, you answered it perfectly.
No.
That's all good.
I can see what you are going to do here. What you are suggesting does not relate to government information. There are very clear guidelines around that.
You answered it. It's fine, Minister.
No, well, don't you mislead me. Don't you dare misrepresent what I said.
You come in here and make a sledge that you won't make outside against the leader of our party.
Oh, come on.
Then you start trying to
Senator
warn
Colbeck,
senators
for goodness
who are
sake.
asking genuine questions. I mean,
Senator
seriously, every
Gallagher
time you guys get a question
is
you don't
quite-
want, you go to personal slur. It happens
is
all the
quite
time.
within her
Don't be
rights
ridiculous.
You know, sit here and put up
to
with
clarify the understanding of what is on the Hansard.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so Senator Hume, do you have further questions
Nope,
for the
that's it.
Department of Finance?
That's it, thanks.
Okay. I think that means the department can be released.
Oh, yeah, you done. God. Don't have it in you.
And we'll now go
No
to
statement
the
after that.
ASC.
Oh my God. It's unheard of.
That's perfect.
Can't even make your questions last.
Should be just yes.
Only when it's required.
So you prove,
so
you're
throwing
mud. So you prove our
Oh,
point.
well, that's
That's
what you
all the
can
Labor Party have is throwing
Yes,
mud.
I see. And you talked
Get an ask-
over
get a hard
ask.
that's right.
I'm just going to suspend
All
while we...
Yeah.
Can
Maybe
you
answer the question.
Order. We'll recommence our proceedings. We have with us and welcome Mr. Stuart Wiley, CEO and Managing Director, and other officers of the ASC. Do you have an opening statement this evening? Okay, we'll go straight to questions. Senator Hume.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you. I should say congratulations, probably is more appropriate, on the signing of the tasking statement between ASC and BAE and ASA.
Thank you.
I'm wondering whether you can expand for the committee on what the signing of that statement means for the progress of SSN and AUKUS.
I'll pass on to Ashley to talk about it. He's got more detail than I do, so Ashley.
So we entered that mobilisation, the first tasking statement, Senator, in December, and that outlines a number of pieces of work over the next 12-month period for ourselves and BAE as the shipbuilder for SSN AUKUS, with 9 different groups of work that are being worked on.
Okay. So what are the outcomes and the partnership arrangements that are described in the tasking statement?
So at the moment, there's separate tasking statements, one to ourselves from the ASA and one to BAE separately, but we operate under a common set of contractual arrangements, if that's what you're meaning, Senator.
Yeah, is there anything more specific than that?
And essentially it's a contract that we're both under common terms, but we have separate tasking statements where we're doing joint deliveries because of the commerciality of the arrangements between the ASA and the 2 different organisations.
Okay. When we asked previously at estimates in May for an update on the body of work that was being undertaken on the supply chain readiness and the build timeline, you advised us then that it was very early days. I think that was the quote we used, very early days, and that you'd only been working with BAE for about 6 to 8 weeks at that stage. So perhaps you could give us a bit more of an update now.
On the supply chain, I'm going to ask Alex, you talk about the supply chain, Alex?
Could you
you just repeat the question for me?
Yeah, sure. So when we asked for an update just on the general body of work that has been undertaken, but specifically on supply chain readiness and the build timeline, we just wanted an update on where you were, because last estimates, it was probably a bit early for that.
Okay. So we're currently working with the ASA.
Sorry, so what was your name? You're just
Sorry.
hiding behind the glasses, so I can't see.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Right. We're currently working with the ASA on the Defence Industry Vendor Qualification Programme. That's in the very early stages to look for how we qualify suppliers to meet the requirements of the Virginia class program, sustainment and build. And we are also working on the development of the capability partnerships to support ASC in growing the necessary capability we need to support these programs.
Okay. The statement that was signed, can you tell me about how it lays out the division of work between ASC and BAE?
I'd like to pass that one to Ashley.
Okay.
Yeah. So within, there's a set of deliverables. There's 37 deliverables within the 12 months. All of those are, let's call it jointly managed by ourselves and BAE with effectively collaboration between the teams. So the division of work is essentially 50-50 in terms of how we work together as a team in those 37 deliverables under the 9 different sets of activity, one of which was the supply chain type activity that you've referenced, Senator.
Yep. Okay. So how then does ASC's role, according to that tasking statement, impact on the future of the ASC's workforce? Is it going to change? What are you expecting in terms of growth, size of your workforce?
Yeah, so one of the...
Over the timeline of that build.
Yeah, so that's being worked up as one of the tasking statement deliverables at the moment, jointly with BAE, a workforce delivery plan for the build.
So there's supply chain, and then there's workforce, and then there's...
Yeah.
You said there were 9, did you say?
There's 9 different threads or elements of work. So one supply chain, there's a workforce one. So you asked about workforce. So that's currently being worked on by ourselves, ASC and BAE, in terms of that deliverable. But it's early days in terms of that activity and it's how it's proceeding.
And the supply chain component, is that about building a sovereign supply chain as opposed to just a general supply chain?
So it's supply chain generally in terms of the need for what SSN AUKUS needs, but obviously it takes into account Australian supply chain as well. A level beyond that would need someone other than me to talk to.
Okay. So is the supply chain development on track, and how do you measure it so far from the build commencement? Thank you.
So I don't have that detail, Senator. That's not something I'm across the desk.
We can take that question on notice to go specifics. The contract was only signed 3 months ago, and there are a number of steps or procedures we have to do in terms of delivery of those tasking statements. So where we are on that specific one, we'll take that question on notice and give you a sit where we're at.
All right. Well, I might broaden out my question then and ask you if you characterise the SSN AUKUS progress as a whole, or at least ASC's part in it, I suppose, as being on track.
Yeah, look, we believe we're broadly on track. We haven't had a program review on the program. There's one scheduled hopefully for the end of this month, and where we sort of get our first view at where the program sits in a complete manner. But certainly from our internal monitoring of what our role is and what our deliverables, we're broadly on track with where we need to be.
Okay. And what are the risks that you've identified that could potentially delay the project?
Have you got anything?
I think the program review that Stuart is talking about will be the first time that balance of information, including risk, comes forward to look at from the teams doing the work. So that's when those issues will come to the fore and be critiqued.
Okay. Sorry, what was the time frame of that?
Well, we're aiming for towards the end of this month.
End of the month?
Yeah, end of March, effectively.
End of March?
Yeah.
All right,
so
terrific.
it's March.
So what's the status of ASC's work to prepare for the arrival of SRF West rotations out of HMAS Stirling in 2027? Have I stolen your thunder there, please?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Senator Paul Gay, Chief Operating Officer for a multi-class sustainment division. In terms of the Surf West contract, Senator, we are working through that at the moment. Our main objective right now, which we've met, was to supply the people into the US to commence their training. And we are also working on the second version of our workforce plan and our support plan, Senator.
Okay. There was some questioning about ASC's responsibilities at prior estimates, where Mr Wiley characterised the details as being quite high level, so I'm wondering if there is further clarity about ASC's role in sustainment at Surf West.
Our role, sorry, Senator, just in sustainment in general?
Well, yes, I suppose sustainment of this project in particular.
Yeah, okay. So the AUKUS program for sustainment is built up into two broad phases. Phase one being Surf West, which is the rotational force for US platforms and astute platforms, so both US and MOD. And so our role there is to primarily send people into the US, Pearl Harbor Navy Shipyard, to train on competencies to work on their platforms under US direction. And as I've just said, we are on track for those training targets right now.
Okay.
And in terms of phase two, which is the sovereign ready, so the Australian flagged Virginias, our role there is to work on the support plan for that, and we're working our way through that now, Senator.
So the preparations to sustain the US and the UK powered submarines are on track and are on budget?
I would say yes. I would say yes.
Okay. So what are the key risks to ASC being ready and able for Surf West commencement in 2027 to perform that sustainment role? It's beyond
it's broader than just ASC, Senator. But from ASC's perspective, we would say that the workforce development, in particular, technologies and skills on the US platform, so they're very different to the support systems of the Collins class. So we have to train those people. So that is a risk. But I'm happy to say that our first tranche of people, we've hit that target.
So what was the target?
We were targeting 130 people in the first year, Senator, so we've got 138 people in Pearl Harbor as of today.
138 in Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I had 100 by January this year, so there we go. You've exceeded
what
the target was. And tell me about how that training's progressed.
The training's going well. As I've said, we've hit the targets, and the US are leading that training for our people in Pearl Harbor, Senator.
Okay. When will short-term, medium-term and deep cycle maintenance capability be available to US and UK submarines under Surf West? Is it early 2027? Is it late 2027? Is it later?
Senator, I don't have a specific date of that. That would be one for defence, but I believe it's in 2027, Senator.
In 2027?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any infrastructure gaps or requirements at HMAS Stirling and Henderson that need to be addressed on that critical path to offering full spectrum of sustainment and maintenance with Surf West boats?
Yes, Senator, there will be some requirements as part of the support system.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what that might be?
Sure, I'll hand to Mr Walsh just in a moment to talk about some of those, but I'll talk just maybe at high level.
Yep.
So we will need special equipment to be manufactured to do some of the support alongside, and then there'll be some radiological components as part of that. So I might ask Mr Walsh to talk about that design.
Yeah, so we're working with the ASA on the requirements for the controlled industrial facility at the moment. That includes the systems for the monitoring of radiation for our workers and for dealing with components components of matter which is taken off of the submarine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think Senator Reynolds has some questions.
Senator Shoebridge.
Senator Shoebridge, sorry.
I'll go to him next and rotate the call between parties, and then I'll come back to you, Senator Reynolds. Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your attendance again today. You're currently, what's the state of the proposed joint venture with BAE for the delivery of the AUKUS submarines?
One of the scopes of work we're undertaking that Ashley referred to is looking into the process of building various business cases to establish the joint venture, and that's what we're currently undertaking.
All right. So I think that was where you were last time. At what stage are the preparatory plans to enter into the joint venture at?
They're still the very in early stages. We're having discussions with BA, looking at the details behind the various scenarios that will take us there. So it's very early stage at this point in time.
All right. And BAE has, one of the reasons you chose BAE is because they're currently the principal contractor for the existing UK nuclear submarine fleet. They have a principal role in the existing fleet. That's one of the reasons you chose them, wasn't it?
We didn't choose them, Senator.
One of the reasons they were chosen for you.
They were chosen for us, yes.
Yes. But that's true about their history.
Yeah,
they're currently deeply involved.
They are the design and build of the UK fleet of nuclear submarines, yes.
Yeah. You must have been troubled then when you read the annual report on major projects by the UK Infrastructure and Projects Authority. The most recent annual report?
I've not seen it, Senator.
You haven't seen it? But it actually has assessed the UK's ability to deliver on their part of the AUKUS submarine project. It's looked at two parts. It's looked at the submersible ship part, the hull, and it's also looked at the core. You haven't read it?
No, I haven't, Senator.
Well, perhaps I'll assist you then, because it's reviewing the work of BAE in developing the submersible ship nuclear AUKUS, is how it's described. And in its review of BAE's work, it says successful delivery of the project is in doubt, with major risks or issues apparent in a number of key areas. Urgent action is needed to address these problems and assess whether resolution is feasible. Did BAE tell you about this assessment of their work?
No, I didn't know about the assessment, sir.
Sorry, how is it... Sorry, you're in the process of scoping a joint venture with BAE. BAE is the principal contractor for the submersible ship nuclear AUKUS project. A publicly available report by the UK's Infrastructure and Projects Authority says that successful delivery of the project is in doubt, with major risks or issues apparent in a number of key areas. How is it you don't have the curiosity to read the report?
Well, I was unaware of the report for one thing, and I think this, the question the report raises, maybe it's a question for ASA, Senator.
This is about your partner.
It's in what I haven't read the report, so I can't provide a comment, Senator.
Well, you agree that a nuclear submarine that you're building is going to need a nuclear reactor to make it work?
That's correct, yeah.
Well, you'd probably be even more trouble if you read the IPA's, the UK Infrastructure and Projects Authority's review of the core reactor.
Well,
and given you haven't read it, I'll read it. I'll read their assessment of it and get your opinion, get your views about whether it's going to impact your project. This is what they say about the core production capability.
Senator, it is, I think, to just with respect to this, the project, as it were, is really a matter for Defence and ASA. ASC is one of the part of the delivery partners that were the government selected, and is working to deliver the job it's been asked to do. But the project as such, and therefore I think the issues you're raising are questions that would be better put to ASA and Defence.
Well, no, you're scoping a joint venture with BAE, which is, I assume part of the scope joint venture will be you do this bits to BAE and we'll do this bits and we'll do these other bits collaboratively. That's a kind of summary of what a joint venture will talk about. Bits the BAE does, bits that you do, bits you do collaboratively. That's that's a core element to the joint venture. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, Senator, but I think you're trying to, the complexity where we're operating and the nature of the program at national level or tri-national level is something really you need to talk to ASA about. And those are the topics I'm sure they're understanding, and how those issues are referred to, whether they're real or not real. So I haven't read the report. It's something that they can maybe provide commentary on. I've not read the report.
Well, you see, if you're entering into a joint agreement that says BAE will do X, Y and Z, surely you should have read the Infrastructure and Projects Authority report that says about BAE's capacity to deliver those very elements.
The ASA is the leader of the joint venture.
If you let me finish my question, Chair, could I be allowed to finish my question, Chair?
Well, we're trying to tell you.
I am being interrupted.
The ASA.
I'm trying to be polite here.
You are. The issue is you may be trying to finish your question, but those at the table might also want to search for context and get you on the same page.
Chair,
so
I just ask you to let me to have the witnesses there. Let me finish the question.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley. You are in the process of scoping a joint venture with BAE, which will include the elements.
We're not actually scoping.
Chair, could you direct the witnesses to let me finish the question?
I
Sorry.
If those to the right of me could just keep their voice down so I can.
Yeah, I'll start again. Oh, no, I'll try and complete the question. Mr. Wiley, you're in the process of scoping a joint venture with BAE, which will include, amongst other things, the elements of the AUKUS submarine project that BAE will be responsible for. The Infrastructure and Projects Authority independent audit of BAE's performance so far in the AUKUS project says that their successful delivery of the project is in doubt, with major risks or issues apparent in a number of key areas. Urgent action is needed to address these problems and or assess whether resolution is feasible. Surely, knowing whether or not your partner is able to do the job would just be the most basic due diligence before you enter into the joint venture.
So I'm glad you raised that, Senator. We haven't done our due diligence yet. That's one of the, again, at the end of this March, we're going to start the due diligence exercise. In terms of the joint venture is the builder of the AUKUS platform in Australia. And that report you refer to doesn't, I believe, refer to those elements in terms of what we're doing. So the scope of work and how that comes together is yet to be determined. And once we understand the capability that BAE has, and they understand the capability we have, and we understand the pathway to build, that's when we can start to develop and construct a coherent plan to build an IJV that they will deliver on the objective. We're much too immature to be drawn into the conversations you're talking into.
Well, you see, Mr. Wiley, your answer would have been better informed had you read the actual report. And because let me finish, because the report describes the project it's looking at. And it says SSN AUKUS is a new class of nuclear-powered, conventionally armed attack submarine being developed in partnership with the US and Australia for the Royal Navy and Royal Australian Navy. The design and manufacturing process will be a complex multi-decade undertaking, creating thousands of jobs across the UK. SSN AUKUS will enable deeper information and technology sharing. They were looking at it as a multinational project. They were looking at the very issues that you say are the subject of the joint venture, and yet you haven't read it. How do you explain it?
I haven't read it. So.
Well, he's answered the question honestly, and we have repeatedly tried to let you know that ASA is the responsible agency when it comes to progressing the nuclear submarine project, including in the joint venture with BAE. You might not like that answer, but that is the answer you're going to continue to be given this evening.
Minister, you're not troubled that the...
I would expect the ASA to be managing all the risks associated with this project. That's what they've been asked to do.
Sorry, the Minister was answering your question and you were interrupting. So, Minister, have you finished responding?
Yeah.
Senator Shoebridge.
Minister, you're not troubled that the Australian Submarine Corporation, which is tasked with entering into a joint venture with BAE, whose performance has been so eviscerated by this IPA authority report. You're not troubled that the ASC hasn't even read the report. That's fine by you, is that you don't expect them to have done that kind of basic research? Is that your position?
Well, the ASA are responsible for negotiating the elements of the joint venture, and Mr Wiley has answered your question.
Mr Wiley, is that right? Is the ASA responsible for developing the elements of the joint venture?
The
Or are you developing the joint venture?
We've been tasked to put a business proposal, that's right, for the IJV as part of the IPT. So that's considering the pathway to the IJV, to an IJV. That's all we've been contracted for at this point in time.
And the business proposal will be BAE does this, we do this, we do these elements together as a joint venture.
Let's negotiate
I
it
think
first,
we
shall
have to do the work first,
Yeah.
Senator, before we can understand what the answer
You
is.
see, how could you possibly be using millions of dollars of Australian taxpayers' money to be coming up with a joint venture where you're assigning tasks to BAE when you haven't even looked at this publicly available critique of their performance? I just don't understand why you're so calm about not having read this report, which says that your potential joint venture partner can't do the job.
I've not read the report. That's your reading of the report. I can't comment on that.
Well, it's red for the last 3 years for the core production, and it's amber red for the last 2 years for the whole.
Well, I don't understand that if we're talking about AUKUS, because AUKUS isn't in construction yet. So I'm not sure what you're referring to, Senator. As I said, we are actually in a very early stage of a development program that's talking about, I believe, possibly, I'm taking your words, talking about construction and design that's ongoing at the moment. And we're not there yet.
I've heard some wild things in the exchange with the Australian Submarine Corporation over time, but your failure to read this publicly available, essential independent audit of your UK partner's performance is extraordinary.
So when was the release, Senator?
Senator Shoebridge, come to your
Senator,
I think we've got it. I think we've...
Tell me when it was released, I'll take it on and I'll read it and I'll provide suggestions, whatever the question is next time.
All right, could you read it and then provide your comments on whether or not you think it has any impact on the
Yeah, I'll take that.
Well, you can read it, but also questions on the timing and elements of the joint venture should be referred to the Australian Submarine Agency.
Where is the Collins class life of type extension project up to?
Senator, it's in the detailed design phase.
Have you begun work on any of the actual life of type extension?
The implementation, Senator, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
No.
I've asked you a couple of times about the report that was undertaken for defence by a former senior US Navy official, which raised a whole series of concerns about the capacity of the ASC to deliver that project. Do you remember those questions? You nodded, Mr. Windier. But
yes, Senator, I remember those questions.
Have you had access to that report yet?
Senator, I've not seen that report.
Have you requested the report from Defence?
I think we talked to them about it when it was reported, when there was discussion about it 12 months ago, but I certainly haven't requested it from them recently.
Okay. One of the issues that you raise in your annual report about that project was supply chain issues because, and I quote, European suppliers impacted by high demand due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. With the US leaving Ukraine and telling Europe it's got to step in and do more, those supply chain issues are only going to get worse, aren't they? So what's your strategy to address them?
That seems quite a lot of sort of ifs and hypotheticals questions there, Senator. I don't think there's a way we can comment on what might happen in Ukraine and what that might mean for supply chains.
Well, you've made it clear that European suppliers are already impacted by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Do you have a way of resolving that supply chain problem?
I assume the report you're reading from is an ASC report.
Correct, your annual report from October 2024.
So I was just commenting, I'm from the Department of Finance, commenting on the general observation that it's tricky to speculate about that impact.
Mr. Wiley, what's your answer?
Sorry, what was the question?
Your annual report says you have key supply chain issues with the delivery of the life of type extension, including that European suppliers impacted by high demand due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Have you resolved those European supply chain issues?
I believe we're pretty much on track with our major suppliers for, if you're talking about Lote, we're on track for those supply elements.
So the concerns you had with European suppliers in October 2024 have been resolved by May 2025?
Yeah, that we had a review last week, and on the summary from that was we're pretty much on track for having supply in support of the first Lote activity, Senator.
All right. As of late last year, of the 6 Collins-class submarines, one was working towards full cycle docking completion at Osborne. Another was scheduled to commence its full cycle docking at Osborne, and the third was undergoing intermediate docking in Western Australia. Is that still the case, or what's been the change?
We have 3 boats currently in the maintenance activity at ASC, Senator.
All right. Are they the same 3 boats that we discussed last year?
I think there might have been a change of one of the boats, Senator.
All right. But is it one that's working towards full cycle docking, one that's scheduled to commence full cycle docking, and one in intermediate docking? Is that the stages of the 3?
Those are the 3 stages, yes.
All right. And is that consistent with your contractual obligations to make Collins-class submarines available, to have 3 in maintenance like that at any one time?
Certainly, we're behind our availability targets at this point in time, Senator.
How far behind?
I'm not going to comment on that, Senator.
For how long have you been behind the availability targets?
Again, I'm not going to comment on that, Senator.
Well, I'm going to press for an answer, and if you want to...
I'll take a question on notice.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Reynolds.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, Mr Wiley and team. It's good to see you all again. Before I come back to Surf West and other related matters, I just wanted to pick up where Senator Shoebridge finished. So you said that you currently have 3 boats in custody, and they may or may not be the same ones when we asked the question in September. Are you able to get someone to confirm whether it is still the same 3 or not?
I'll take the question on notice and think how I can respond, Senator.
A bit surprising you don't know which boats you've got in.
Oh, I do. I know what boats we've got, Senator, but I just don't want to give names and stuff away.
Yes, I know we've been around that buoy before, but has there been one in or out since September? Surely that's not too hard a question for somebody here.
If I may, Senator,
Thank you.
The 2 in South Australia are unchanged.
So that means that the one in Western Australia is new.
It's changed out, Senator.
And given I saw 2 in Garden Island last week, I know which ones they are, so thank you, that's helpful. Okay, so presumably all 3 of them are out of the water at the moment? Or is one in South Australia now in the water and one out, and the one in WA is obviously out?
All 3 are docked at the moment, Senator.
3 docked, thank you. And how long are they scheduled to be out of action for?
I won't comment on the time frame, Senator.
Okay. You won't. Okay, so we've done that. So at the last estimates, it was hoped that one of the boats which had suffered significant corrosion would soon be returned to Navy. We had somewhat of a discussion, and I think that was with Senator Birmingham at the time. What's the status of that corrosion issue now?
I think Paul's answered that question, Senator.
So that's the boat that is back in the water and back in Navy's custody?
That's correct, Senator.
Okay. So we also, from memory, discussed the possibility that this corrosion issue that had been identified in this particular boat may have implications for other boats. Has that issue been looked at further? And have you got any further information on that?
We certainly do the root cause analysis of when we do find issues like this, and it's fed back into the maintenance baseline. So we will look to, when we do similar types of maintenance surveys on future boats, it will be part of that work scope, Senator.
Okay. And given I saw 2 in Garden Island last week, I know that was with Senator Birmingham at the time. We had somewhat of a discussion, and I think that was with Senator Birmingham at the time. Well, I understand that you'll be looking at that when you look at the boats next, but we did also have a discussion about whether you were going to look proactively to see whether there are any other boats that were already showing signs of this corrosion. Or are you now saying you're going to wait until it comes in for the next cycle of docking?
It'll be part of the survey scoping as it comes into it for its appropriate dockings.
Okay. So I guess the answer to that then is that you'll wait till the boats come through their regular cycles of docking?
That's correct.
And you don't feel the need at the moment to do any additional checks? Okay. So also just picking up from Senator Shoebridge, are you able to provide an update on Farncombe and its cycling, its preparations for Lote? How the time frame for that is going?
Thanks, I'll take that one, Senator. I won't talk about particular platforms, Senator. I would say that we have a Lote design schedule that supports the early implementation or the early planning phases of Lote, Senator.
Can you say that in English?
We have a design schedule that supports the implementation of the Lote program, Senator.
Well, I know that you have a design program to implement this, but are you able to provide the time frame? Is it on schedule in accordance with the previous schedules that we've talked about at estimates and elsewhere? I don't need to know the existence of this because that's self-evident. It does exist. So is it on schedule?
Sorry, Senator, are you asking about the design of Lote or the implementation activity?
The preparations to take Farncombe into Lote.
So there's two.
Or the not mentioned, but it's in public releases. So on the Farncombe. Yeah,
there's two parts to the first boat that will undergo FCDs or Lote extensions, Senator. There is a standard maintenance package, which is what we do in all of the availabilities when the submarines come in. So that's driven by the maintenance baseline. And then there's the additional Lote upgrades, which effectively sit on top of that. So the first platform is not in its normal planning phase at this stage for basic maintenance or standard maintenance. And then, as I've said before, the design of the Lote program, the schedule currently supports that. The design phase for the implementation, Senator.
It's a masterful answering of the question without actually answering my question. So maybe if I could just put it a different way, just in a way that's a bit more, less project management, if I could, just to make sure I understand your question. So I understand what you've said. So Farncombe is now not going through the normal, I think it said the standard package, but is now being prepared for the extra Lote package, and that schedule, can I then take, is on track?
Can I just clarify that?
Yes, please.
And when we bring platforms into maintenance, we have a standard planning window,
yes,
which we start.
Yes.
The first Lote boat has not met that first window, so it wouldn't start normal planning yet, is what I mean by that.
Okay, so I think we're now getting down to the question. So you're actually saying that it's behind schedule?
No, Senator. Well, what I'm saying.
So is it on schedule? Because we've seen schedules here, and I've seen many of them over the years in previous roles. So when was it scheduled to start this, and when is it now scheduled to start? Is there slippage?
Senator, the normal planning window for a full cycle docking is 12 months out from commencement. So if the platform was going to start, say, in mid-2026, we wouldn't start planning until mid-2025 for standard maintenance.
Yes.
So in that respect, we haven't hit that threshold yet.
So you haven't hit the 2025 threshold, is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Which means that you are unlikely to meet the 2026 cycle milestone.
No, Senator. We start planning 12 months out from a normal commencement.
But you haven't started planning yet?
Correct, because we're not 12 months out yet.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Wouldn't it have been easier just to say, yes, it is on schedule, or no, it's not on schedule,
sorry,
rather
Senator,
than going through these verbal contortions?
No, sorry, Senator. I was trying to be clear, but I think we got there in the end,
I think
Senator.
just for those who aren't familiar with the intricacies of submarine maintenance scheduling, you're saying that it is on track to commence in mid-2026?
That is the current plan, yes.
And you'll start the planning for it mid this year?
That's correct, Senator.
Thank you.
That's right.
Okay, so what's the latest estimated cost for the LOAT program?
Senator, I think the estimated cost in terms of the current expenditure, Senator, if you just gave me a moment. Sorry, Senator, just give me a moment here. I do have it here in my machine.
Actually, while you're doing that, I might just, while you're looking for that information, thank
Sure.
you. Maybe this one might be for you, Mr. Wiley. The issue of product of concern, is the Collins class submarine sustainment currently a product of concern?
Yes, it is.
So can you just tell us what the implications of that are for the program?
I can't say too much because it's classified, Senator, but...
In an unclassified sense, what does it actually mean?
It's basically enhancing the availability of the Collins class Senator.
And?
That's about all I can say, Senator.
Okay.
Can I just...
Yes, please do.
Add to that, I just want to understand whether there's been any additional funding for sustainment for Collins associated with the remediation plan that was announced on the 12th of February?
I think that's all issues related to the plan should be directed to Defence. It's their plan, Senator.
So what's the expected sustainment cost for the Collins in 24-25?
Sustainment cost 24-25.
For the Collins normal maintenance, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but the 4-year contract number is about $2 billion, so it's about a quarter of that normally, so it'd be about half.
So the budget has it listed at $769 million, but since being listed as a product of concern in December, Defence and you guys have developed this remediation plan for the sustainment of Collins. According to the media release, it's a joint plan, but you can't tell me whether there has been a request for additional funding?
It's Defence's plan. We're supporting Defence's plan, Senator.
So it's a plan that you're supporting,
yeah,
but not a joint plan?
Well, we are collaborating inside, but it's Defence's plan.
Right. So if there has been a request for additional funding, it's not something that you're aware of?
Again, I can't say too much because of the classification of it, but I think you should ask any questions about funding should be directed to Defence.
Right. I suppose my concern is that it affects the budget and it's finance, so that's kind of
well,
where
Defence
we're
manages
the
it within their IIP, so they, the questions about how they're managing that within their broader defence envelope is a
you
matter
mentioned
for
a little
them.
earlier, Minister, that defence was one of the great pressures on the budget. So
Yeah, it
clearly
is, which is
part of
why
that.
we've increased funding so considerably to the Department of Defence and other national security agencies.
And have you increased funding again more recently in response to additional requests?
Over and above what we've already put in.
That's in the budget?
I would have to check. They have certainly got significant increases in funding to not only deliver the AUKUS project, but also their broader capability. So I think we've increased funding considerably in the order of billions. I'll see if I can find you the figures.
Is there additional funding in MyEFO that I might not have picked up on?
Let me check on that because we certainly go through the defence budget closely. I'll just see if there's anything more I can provide you.
Just this, can I just ask, what is exactly ASE's role then in this plan?
we're providing support to defence and plan centre. I can't tell you what our specific role is.
Why?
The plan itself is classified.
Mr. Wiley, I think if I don't, and in fact, I'm confident it wouldn't be breaching confidential issues for you to tell us the nature of the role. Not actually going into the detail, but are you not able to provide the most basic information of what role?
Senator, you are entitled to ask the question and push for the answer. However, Mr. Wiley is quite within his rights he shouldn't just be acceding to having that kind of pressure on him. He needs to be able to work out the extent to which an answer is in the public interest to give. So I'm just intervening so that he has the opportunity
not to answer the question,
to respond in a way that's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that clarification. However, I would most respectfully submit that we certainly have the right where officials don't answer the question based on a very vague, we can't discuss it because it's classified, to actually ask what parts of it are classified, and because not all parts of all of these questions are classified. So, Chair, I thank you for the ruling, but we are certainly entitled to question why certain things are supposedly classified.
Yes, indeed, Senator Reynolds, you can, but I would not want to be put in a spot where in answering a question you have to decide on the run what's classified and what's not. So, Mr. Wiley, answer the question in the way that you see fit now, and if you need to take parts of the question on notice, please do.
The sensitivity of what the classification, I'll take it on notice to see what I can and can't say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiley. Okay, so can I just ask then, from your perspective, what factors led to becoming a product of concern?
I think that question should be directed to Defence. It's their plan. They initiated the product of concern. Yeah. But I will say availability has been a factor that has led to product of concern.
But Mr. Wiley, with the utmost of respect, your organisation and this particular sustainment activity has been deemed a product of concern. And I don't find it credible that in your position you have no indication of why your organisation and your a key mandate of you to deliver, you have no idea of why it's been deemed a product of concern.
I did provide you an answer, Senator. From my perspective, its availability has been the issue that we need to improve upon.
Okay, so its availability, or the non-availability of the Collins class, which we discussed at last estimates. So what are the main factors that have had you behind in the sustainment and the availability of the Collins?
I mean, the Collins has faced a number of well-documented challenges over time, and they provide some legacy availability issues, which are driving towards the position where we are today, Senator.
Again, a masterful non-answer, but in terms of specific, Mr. Wiley, you're discussing it as if, the way, to me, what you've said is the Collins have these problems that have caused these issues, but ASC is responsible for the maintenance and sustainment of these boats. So they're not some passive object over here that's had some impact on you. You're the ones who have actually not delivered it according to schedule. So if you could be a little more specific about the reasons for that non-availability.
So Senator, without giving too much away, the ASC is responsible for some part, but not the whole part. Inside our part, the issues of challenges have been well documented. We've spoken about in here over a number of years. We've the death of COVID, we had the Waller fire, We've had ageing asset, we've had supply chain issues we've talked about today. There's ageing asset issues inside the platform. There's a number of challenges that we've had inside the platform which have driven availability today.
So the prolonged strike, workers' strike, can you give us an update on that? And also how long, because at the September estimates, you did provide us with an estimate from memory of the impact on the schedule of that. So what is the latest on the impact of that strike on the schedule? I
don't think we provided an impact on schedule. What we provided was an impact of direct labour's hours lost associated with industrial action, and the final figure was 29,000 man-hours lost over 52 industrial actions across the two states.
That's a lot. So what was the impact? So that's the lost hours and the number of actions. So what was the material impact on the schedule?
That's currently being worked through, Senator.
That's part of the remediation plan, is working through some of those issues.
So we've got a situation, Mr. Wiley, where you're responsible for a schedule to deliver these vital national assets. So we heard in September that it was significantly behind and that these 52 industrial actions had had a significant impact on the availability of the Collins in terms of slowing it down while you were working on them. So you're telling me now that since September, you're still working out, getting the calculator out to work out what the impact on the schedule was from these 29,000 hours.
The industrial action didn't finish until November, Senator. I think we only signed up at the beginning of, basically got agreement to the end of November, and it was only ratified in Fair Work last week in terms of the South Australian agreement. We've obviously been working as business as usual, but since the November sort of agreement, but it takes time to understand what the options are. We are considering a number of options, and they've been put to Defence for their consideration.
So 29,000. So just to make sure, so 29,000 hours lost, correct?
Yeah, direct hours lost by people working in industrial action, approximately.
Okay, over 52 separate actions. So you came to agreement in November, ratified now. So you are telling us that you don't know the impact of this on the schedule. Surely that is self-evident in terms of how far you are now behind on the schedule.
There are a number of options of how the schedule can be recovered, and they went to consideration, was it Paul, last week to PRB?
Yes, that's correct.
They went to the Program Review Board last week for consideration. I'm not sure what the outcome of that meeting was, Senator.
That's extraordinary. Okay, so can you just summarise this industrial action then? So how many months did the action last altogether, these 52 actions?
It was over a 6 month period, approximately 6 month period.
6 months. And so specifically, what work was delayed? Which workers and what work was delayed?
It was across the, primarily the work delayed was in South Australia, and it was done primarily in the trade areas across all trade groups inside the organisation.
So it was primarily, but not only, in South Australia. So there was some strike action in WA.
There was some minor strike action in WA.
Okay. So how many people did this? So we've got 29,000 woman hours. How many people were involved in the strike? So when you say there's all trade groups are involved,
I would say circa 350 to 400. I'd say
351.
350 to 400. I don't know exactly.
So what programs in particular did this impact in Osborne and in Henderson in terms of what packets of work?
It primarily impacted the full cycle docking centre.
full cycle docking. And this obviously impacted on the timing of the delivery of the last boat that we won't mention, but has recently left Osborne and is back in custody of the Navy. So how many months late was that? We had an estimation of how late that was at the last estimates, but now how late was it going back to Navy?
I'm not sure of the question, Senator.
Well, the boat whose name we can't mention, that we agreed has now left Osborne and is back in the custody. So we said earlier that we had 2 boats in Adelaide in your custody and 1 in Western Australia, and that one of the 2 boats in Adelaide was a different boat from what was there when we last talked in September, and that one had now gone back to the custody of Navy.
No, not Adelaide. Is that Western Australia?
Western Australia, Senator.
Western Australia, Senator.
So it was West Australia. Okay,
Yeah.
so the 2 boats that are in South Australia are still the 2 boats that were there last year. Okay, so far is one of them overdue to go back to return back to Navy?
Yes, it is, Senator.
And how long is that overdue? How many months has that now been impacted?
By PIA, Senator?
Yes.
I'll take that question on notice to actually give you an answer. Because again, it depends on what the recovery plan is to deliver it back to understand how far it's been impacted.
No, with respect, Mr. Wiley, you absolutely know, and I know the tables and the spreadsheets and everything you have in terms of with what comes in and out. So we know that one of the boats is much delayed now, being returned back to Navy because of these industrial action and some of the other problems you mentioned. But how late is it? And how many more months will it be before that boat is then returned into service with Navy?
Again, Senator, I can help with that.
Thank you.
In terms of the current delays against the baseline schedule, that platform is currently about 7 to 8 months overdue.
So 7 to 8 months, so already, and then there'll be another, presumably...
Then it has to be completed, Senator.
Yeah. Okay. So 7 to 8 currently, and then plus whatever else it will be to actually... Okay, thank you. Now, if we could come back to AUKUS, please, yes.
Just on the industrial action that's going on. Did ASC have any conversations with Minister Conroy about the industrial action?
I had one minor conversation with him. I was in a meeting on a topic on it, and I believe my team had a meeting with him in Adelaide. So.
You were familiar, you were across that meeting, Minister?
Yes, I was aware of that meeting, and I was involved in a couple of meetings as well.
Okay. Did the discussions include additional funding required in order to get ASC working again?
Not in the conversation I had, and I don't believe the one of my team either.
Right. There was a significant ambit from staff, which, you know, we had to be resolved through the negotiations, and ultimately it was to parties' satisfaction.
Thanks.
So just on that, we've got a 7 to 12 month possibly delay because of all of this action of the return of the boat that hasn't been returned back to Navy's custody. So will there be a concertina impact on other vessels? Because obviously until that one's out, you don't have the next one come in. So are you able to give some sort of indication of the capability impact that's going to have on Navy and what you're doing to remediate
That's why
that?
it's a project, has been listed as a project of concern, and all effort is going into reducing any impact on capability.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for answering the question that Mr Wiley couldn't a minute ago. So thank you for that. Can we go back now to AUKUS?
Senator Reynolds, your attempts at courtesy but are indeed, you know, verging on discourtesy to witnesses. So,
What?
Serious?
I thank the Minister for asking a question that wasn't able to be answered earlier. I think that's quite
anyway,
courteous.
I'm just going to leave it because, Just please continue and just think about your manner in asking questions.
Thought about it?
I've thought about it, Chair, and thank you very much for that admonition. And I'm certain that I won't say thank you anymore if that's your ruling. But
Just in
a few
early-
thank yous might just pop out. Sorry.
In relation to extra investment, Defence has had a $38.7 billion increase between 22-23 and 24-25.
Okay.
Thank you. It's very helpful. So can we, I said, come back to AUKUS now, and I just want to pick up a few of the questions from Senator Hume. Mr Wiley, if you remember at the last estimates, I asked a series of questions about your engagement of a company called Orbis.
Yep.
And we had quite an extended discussion about it, trying to seek some more information. So my recollection at the time is you said that it was for a high-level sustainment study, and that this company, you picked them sole source because they were doing work for the US Navy. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That's, okay. And at the time you said it was early days and weren't able to provide a lot of information then about exactly what they'd be doing and how that would then fit in with the other packets of work that we'll come to. So are you able now to provide a bit more information about Orbis and what they'll be doing, when, and how much they're costing?
Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Paul. We've got that prepared for that.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. Yes, we did talk about that in the last session, and ASC did respond with questions on notice, which was F20,
yep,
which details what Orbis was contracted to do there, which was they're helping us evaluate the model state of how the US system currently works, help us analyse the Australian system, Senator, and identify any gaps, and then help us with some action plans around that, Senator. And in that question on notice, there was 14 areas listed of where they were helping us, and that ranges from nuclear stewardship, from engineering support, physical security, etc.
So I haven't seen that quan. I'll just check that, see that whether it's made its way to the Minister's office and whether it's actually come. It may well have come through, but we'll just need to check on that. So you've got these areas. So how many? 10 areas?
There was 14.
1 to 14 areas. So you said that they're already doing work for the US Navy and the US SSNs.
Yep.
So are you getting them to replicate the work that they've done for the US Navy in those 14 areas, or where is the information coming from, and how are you then going to use it?
So the Orbis have ex-service people and nuclear technicians as part of their staff, and they're very familiar with the US support system. So they are considered experts in the holistic support system.
Can I just stop you there, just to clarify? So you said that they're familiar with the US support system, but are they currently doing any contracted work for the US Navy, or are these people who have worked on various aspects of the SSNs in the past? Because at that point we sort of went around a bit. Are they currently contracted to the US Navy, or are they people who've done it in the past?
Senator, I think it's both. I think they do have current... I could take that and check that for you, Senator, but
yes,
I do believe that they are doing current work with the US, and some of their staff are ex-United States Navy people.
So how much is the value of the contract?
Senator, it was as of the 5th of November, it was 2.8 million US.
Over what period?
Sorry, Senator, let me just...
So when are you expecting... So you're expecting them to deliver a report?
They're helping us with our report, Senator. So as of February of, basically of this month, it is now 5.4 million US dollars, and that goes out to the 2nd of July of this year.
So how, are they actually doing that work in the United States, or are they here in
It's a combination, Senator. We have some of their individuals here.
Okay. So
I've got.
So which report?
Oh, just is that question FO20 was answered on the 19th of December? I think that's the same.
Yeah.
One.
That's the one.
2.8 million. It says USD value.
So 2.8, but it's now gone up to 5.4 since December.
Since the last hearing, Senator.
Okay. That's a big increase. So you're obviously seeing great benefit from their advice.
We are, Senator.
Okay. So when you say this is information going into your report, which report is this going into? Because there's a number of studies and reports going on.
Under our contract to support defence, our current arrangement is we have two main deliverables. Well, in terms of plans, there is the support system plan and a workforce plan. And the support system plan covers all those 14 topics that was in the question on notice, Senator. And the workforce plan really then helps us build the skills, like mapping out the skills that we need now and into the future in our training systems.
So is this all focused on phase 2, which is the Australian SSN, not the work that we do, that you are going to be doing for the US Virginias?
It's both, Senator. They're helping us with both.
Okay. Now, Mr. White, so just thank you, that's very helpful. So, Mr. Wiley, coming back to an update from our last discussion, when I was asking you, then coming into the work for Surf West specifically, you said that you had not yet been consulted by ASA in terms of your specific requirements for facilities at Stirling to do the more routine and depot level maintenance on the US SSNs and then eventually on ours. Have those conversations now occurred, or is this what this report is going to feed into?
No, that's completely different.
Okay.
I think the report you're referring to is one that's been drawn up by Bechtel, and certainly we've been engaged in that review, Senator.
Okay, so can you then just clarify? So we've got this packet of work that you are doing for support system plans, the 14 topics, workforce plan, which is both for phase 1 and phase 2. So would it be safe to say that this is characterising your user requirements in terms of what you need structurally, so in terms of support systems and also workforce to deliver phase 1 and phase 2 in Osborne and in Henderson? So is this your internal plan to say this is what we need?
It's our plan, Senator, but it is a contract deliverable to Defence. But I think it would be fair to say that it starts to set out our requirements of the system. Yes.
Okay. So this is your way of telling Defence what you need to do the job they expect that ASA is going to need?
Yes.
Okay. So how is that so that's this internal body of work that you're doing with Orbis. The Bechtel review, can you just elaborate a bit further what your input into the Bechtel review was and what the outcome of that Bechtel review and where that's gone, and just how it's different?
As I understand it, the Bechtel review was they came and visited us with the proposal for the facility, and we then did a critique on it and asked a lot of questions and waiting for a response on those questions.
Okay, so Bechtel consulted you, you said, on facilities.
I think they had a design, and they asked us to critique it, and we then provided a critique on it based on our knowledge of doing depot level type maintenance and the types of facilities we believe we would need.
Okay, so when you say depot level, is that for the sustainment and maintenance to occur in Stirling, or also at Henderson and Osborne?
As I understand it, it was only related to the work at Henderson.
Okay, which will eventually be the much deeper level maintenance where you need to actually get the boats out of the water. So that's for the SSNs, but that wasn't in relation to Garden Island, what facilities, because we've discussed that before, what facilities you will need for phase 1 at Stirling as well as... So who are you working with now in terms of your user requirements at Stirling?
So maybe I can answer that.
Please.
We've been engaged in the discussions and the reviews of the design of the controlled industrial facility, which is moving towards its 50% design review. And
the controlled industrial facility at Henderson or Stirling?
At Stirling.
Okay, yep.
And we are working to specify the requirements for the equipment which is going to be required in there, and also the concepts of operations documents and maintenance documents and operating procedures.
So that is being fed through from the Orbis review. So that's one of the several of the 14 points that will go into what you need at Stirling.
So this is not all being done by Orbis. I have a significant now nuclear qualified team, but we're being supported by Orbis in supporting the ASA in that activity.
But that package of work done by Orbis, well, advising you, done by your team, has fed into the Bechtel, the questions that Bechtel asked you about the...
I think that's all different reports.
Okay, that's why I just want to go through this, because it's not very clear externally.
I think there's 3 topics going on, Senator, if my help. We're providing a support plan to the ASA and NSG regarding what is required for, firstly, the Surf West and then ultimately for Sovereign Virginia. And Orbis are definitely playing a key part in that. There's a Henderson precinct study that's been done by Bechtel. And then there's the Stirling work that's been basically driven by ASA. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. With the support of KBR and some other contractors.
Yep, okay. So, Bechtel relates to Henderson, which is now, as I understand it, has resulted in the $127 million contract, an agreement with the WA government to do further user specifications requirements, which is going to take the next 2 years in terms of Henderson. So the information you have provided Bechtel, presumably that will then go into the new study that's been commissioned in conjunction with the WA state government.
I'm not sure of the process steps after our involvement. I think that's something, maybe question for maybe NSG or...
It is, but I think it's also important for us to understand from your perspective, because this is a big complex, there's a lot of parts to this. So you've provided, so for Henderson, you've provided Bechtel with your input in terms of what you think you need at Henderson.
That's correct.
Okay. So you've also doing a review now for Defence, for the ASA, about what you need on Garden Island. And you said that's at about 50%.
It's coming up to 50%.
Okay, coming up to 50% in terms of that data. And, okay. And then you've got the sustainment and maintenance work requirements and the facilities you're going to need. So this is the first bit that you mentioned of the 3, Mr. Wiley, is that correct?
So the first bit I mentioned was Henderson.
Yes.
Right. Then, well, actually the first bit I mentioned was the general support plan.
It was, yes.
And then the first facility piece was Henderson, second facility piece, Stirling. So there's the support is a general plan, and then specifically infrastructure are 2 separate documents, 2 separate plans.
Okay. Could I perhaps ask if you could, on notice, given that there are a lot of moving parts to a lot of reviews and a lot of different timeframes, which I'm not sure quite intersect as they should yet, would you be able to take on notice for us, Mr. Wiley, those 3 work packages that you talked about? If you could take on notice what exactly ASC engagement is for each of those projects, what your inputs are, and then what you need to get out of that so that you can develop, prepare, design, build and get ready for those 3 separate packages of work, because I think that would provide more clarity, and particularly then because when we ask similar questions to ASA and Defence, there's a lot of this going on. So I think it'd be quite helpful if we could get that so we can see clearly what reviews feeding into what and how, most importantly, how much and how long.
Okay, no problems.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a couple of clarifying questions too, please? First of all, what date was the EBA issue resolved?
Formerly, South Australia was, can you got the date there? End of January, wasn't it? Formerly?
29th of January.
Yeah, actually, formally inside the Fair Work, it was 29th of January.
29th of January. And what was the date that the product of concern was declared?
13th of December.
13th of December?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the date of your casual meeting with Minister Conroy?
My catch-up with the one I...
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have to go back and look it up.
Just
It was just after another general meeting. We had a quick sidebar conversation. So it wasn't a meeting per se. So
there was a formal meeting at which he was attending, and then afterwards you had a casual meeting.
Yeah.
What was the occasion of the formal meeting? Do you remember?
It was to do with maritime skilling. So I know what the meeting was, to do with maritime skilling requirements.
Right. And
that was in WA. I know
it was in WA?
I could find out the date. I can let you know.
Can you just vaguely?
Yeah. Not vaguely off the top of my head, but I can let you know. My question on notice, definitely can let you know.
Was Minister Gallagher involved in that?
No. It was a conversation on the meeting was on a different topic.
Right.
And it was just a sidebar conversation.
And Minister, you became aware of the casual meeting that Mr. Wiley had with Minister Conroy?
No, I didn't. I definitely didn't tell the minister. I didn't.
So I
thought you said you were involved somehow in that.
Well, I was. And I certainly spoke to both Minister Conroy and Minister Miles about ASC and the industrial action that was going on there. I spoke a number of times with them,
right,
as you would expect us to.
Yep. Okay. So after that casual meeting with Minister Conroy, which I assume the industrial action was discussed?
He asked me a couple of questions, yeah.
Yes. Okay. When a product of concern is declared, does that change the status of a minister from Defence to be able to get involved in solving industrial actions? It doesn't?
No.
So a product of concern, the implications of a declaration of product of concern are what?
Well, that it brings forward in a very formal and structured process, and Collins was subject to project of concern, I think, for
9 years.
9 years before, so it's not unusual. During
2009 to 17,
yeah,
I think.
during your term in government. And so these are structured ways of bringing all the parties together to reach agreement on the best way to solve some of the challenges that have been identified. I think one of, that's been the strength of them. The Minister Conroy, I think, has held a number of them since he came to his position, and they are working very effectively at identifying areas for improvement. And so we had a meeting, I think, earlier this month. He and I sort of essentially co-chaired that meeting with all relevant people around the table.
Was Minister Conroy involved in the resolution of the EBA?
No.
Indirectly?
I don't know. I mean, it was resolved at the employer level, as you would expect, through EBAs. But obviously, the industrial action was a concern to Defence, as you would imagine.
Yes. So normally CASG would be involved. Yes?
NSG wouldn't be involved. We informed the stakeholders of the status of negotiations throughout the process.
Right.
He's not.
Okay. I just want to ask the Minister one more question. You just on the number that you mentioned before, the 37.8 billion increase between 22-23 and 24-25. Can I just clarify, was that an increase over that 3 years, or was it over the 3 years new funding was agreed to that was worth 37.8 billion?
Sorry, I don't understand the difference in the question you're asking me.
Was it just a progressive increase over those 3 years, or was there new funding involved? So I just want you to unpack for me
additional funding. It was additional funding to what was forecast.
That was what I needed.
When we came to government.
Thank you. Thanks. That's great.
I think it features as a component of your $350 billion of wasteful spending. It is a subset of that.
To pay for industrial action.
No.
Just put us 12 months.
No, it's not to pay for industrial action. It's actually to pay for increased capability in the Department of Defence, which was, again, an area which had been under-attended to.
One more, a couple of questions, Mr. Wiley, is we focused on Orbis and their US expertise. What engagement are you having with the UK in terms of what are the requirements for the astute? Because obviously their requirements are going to be quite different than the Virginia's. So how are you doing? Are you doing parallel planning?
At this stage, we haven't had so much focus on the UK. We believe the timeline for that is more generous than the US, because obviously with Surf West is the immediate action that's happening very, very soon. But we have identified the type of work we do need to do, and we know the company that we need to talk to about the UK. So we've got that in line, but we haven't really actively sought out to engage in this one.
At the moment, it's 100% focused on the detail.
I'd say 95% focus on Virginia.
Okay. So what time frame? Obviously, the Virginias are already starting to arrive with, their support vessel, and we've got the first US families arriving, I think, in 4 months, and they're ramping up quite quickly after that. So what is the time frame then for really getting into the detailed planning with the UK? For the astute requirements?
I think probably that's a question for ASA, Senator. I haven't got that timing in front of me.
That surprises me, Mr. Wiley, given that you will be equally responsible, as I understand it, for doing the same work for the astute as you will, or are you saying it's going to be two different?
The models may be different. Again, the UK, we have to have that conversation with the various agencies. The UK may already have a model, as I understand it, for flyaway teams that support their activities. So I think it'd be horses for courses, effectively. And, as I understand it, the UK first boat is not here for some time. But certainly we've had early conversations with the UK Submarine Design Authority and various agencies about support, and we know who the major subcontractor is we've got to talk to in that area, but it's not a priority.
But the conversations yet haven't occurred?
Sorry, the conversations have occurred.
So you're saying you know who you need to talk to,
we haven't had
you just haven't had the conversations
yes, right.
yet?
Yeah, focus has been primarily on Virginia at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you to the ASC for your attendance this evening.
You never know.
I now call on Australian Naval Infrastructure to come to the table.
Who have we got now? Oh, and yeah. Oh, Future Fund, and then DTA, I think. Yeah, you. Yeah, you didn't show. Exactly. There's not much to say. In fact, you want to do the Yes, I'll do the last one. Hello, how are you?
I think everything is just and we've been watching.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
When you're ready, Chair.
Thank you. I now welcome Australian Naval Infrastructure, Mr. Andrew Seaton, CEO and Managing Director, and other officers of ANI. Mr. Seaton, did you have an opening statement you needed to make this evening?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for staying so late. Can I ask what progress has been made in the concept design of the nuclear-powered submarine construction yard?
We've made a lot of progress since I was last year here, including The design continuing on all aspects of the yard. We've now inducted over 600 people into our integrated delivery office in the Adelaide CBD. We are hitting milestones in terms of our early concept designs and our concept design deliverables. We're moving on to construction of early works. So we've mobilised a contract with Acciona to build a key piece of enabling infrastructure, which is a grade-separated bridge over the railway line into the site of the new submarine yard. We have awarded a contract to Hanson Yuncken for the Skills and Training Academy. We've awarded another contract to McMahon Services for early works on the Skills and Training Academy. We have another contract with Hanson Yuncken for managing contractor for production demonstration facilities, which involves upgrading some existing facilities at Osborne as well as building some new facilities. To enable that, we've demolished some existing buildings at Osborne. We have progressed...
Just on that production demonstration facility, what's the status on completion? Is that specifically to time?
That's, I guess, running on a program where we will start to hand over some of those facilities towards the end of this year. And some next year. So that's tracking well to program.
Okay. I think that was the answer that you gave us last time we saw you, the second half of 2025.
Yeah.
There's nothing more specific than that?
Well, we've now awarded contracts since then. So Hanson Yuncken have actually mobilised, and for the upgrade of, there's 2 existing facilities that will be upgraded. On one of them, they've actually started with the foundations and piling within the building. So it's going well.
So the concept design expected to be completed in the second half of 2025. What's the next phase after that?
So the concept design is being completed kind of facility by facility. So we completed some concept designs late last year. We've got some more deliverables over the next couple of months. Probably now the concept design for what we call Area 3 will push out beyond the end of this year as we're working through some complexity around the nuclear licence facilities. But overall, we're hitting milestones and delivering designs for different aspects of the facility.
So does the concept design have to be finished in its entirety before you move into the next phase?
No, not at all.
Right.
So, we think about the shipyard broadly in 3 areas. Area 1 is the steel fabrication, Area 2 is the outfitting, and Area 3 is the consolidation, launch and set to work facilities.
Mm-hmm. And they're all being worked on at the same time?
They are.
Just at different paces?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are there any construction works that have been completed since December 2023?
Completed, no.
Yeah. Okay. Are there further works that are likely to begin before that concept design is completed?
So I just started to touch on some of the construction works that we're starting. So
they've started even though the concept design hasn't been finished. I'm literally trying to draw a timeline in my head. The concept design keeps going till the middle of 2025, but there are different milestones throughout that have been started, but then there are completion dates that occur after the concept design has been completed.
That's right.
Yes?
So there's some areas that we've accelerated. For example, the production demonstration facilities.
Right, yes.
So we've completed the concept design for the PDF stage 1. So that has been completed, and we're now moving into detailed design and construction of those facilities.
Okay.
The remainder of Area 1, we will have the concept design completed by the end of March. and then there'll be a review period for the ASA and the shipbuilder, so BAE and ASC, and then we'll move into the schematic design for those facilities. So we've got multiple different buildings within the site, within those three areas, and we're trying to progress them where we have a good understanding of the functional requirements and where we know we need to accelerate facilities. We're getting after delivering those facilities. Some of the other facilities will take a bit longer in the concept design.
Okay. You said you had 600 people in the workforce now. Is that specifically on NPSCY?
I said we've inducted 600 into our office in the city.
In the city, okay.
On any given day we might have 300-ish working in that facility.
Right.
But overall on the project, if you look at the contractor workforce on site, work being done in design offices and so forth, we estimate we have around 1,100 people.
1,100 all up. Okay. So of the 1,100, 600 have been inducted into the city.
That's right.
Around 300 at any one time on site, on that site?
No, in the city office.
In the city office, okay, in the city office. And obviously there's some elsewhere as well. Okay. And what's the anticipated growth of the workforce over the next 4 years?
We've said we expect to peak at about 4,000.
Ah, okay.
And that's in the construction of the facilities.
Right. When do you expect to hit that peak?
That'll be from sort of 27 type time frame.
27, okay. When you last appeared at Estimates, Senator Birmingham asked about the contracting model that would be taken to complete works, and you advised that you were tendering for a transaction advisor to help with the contracting strategy.
That's right. So we appointed a transaction advisor in December.
Right.
And we are working with that advisor at the moment to inform us on the delivery strategy and a market engagement strategy. So in the next few months, we will be going to market to get feedback from qualified construction companies who will be able to work with us both as a delivery partner or capability partner, but also in the actual construction of the facilities and the packaging of that construction.
Right, okay. All right. I think Senator Reynolds has some questions for you, and then I might follow up at the end.
I do. We'll just jump over the rabbit-proof fence to Western Australia if we could. Okay. It's good to see you again, Mr Seaton and team. Yes. Now, last time we discussed about Henderson in particular, it was still a little unclear as to what your role would be. And I think the assessment, I mean, you were still going ahead and doing some environmental approval work and some other projects and involved in the task force. So my first question is, has there been any more clarity now in terms of ANI's role in terms of sort of post-Bechtel report and now the $127 million review of what your role will or could be in the West?
The short answer is no. Defence are running the current phase of work, which is defining what the consolidation looks like at Henderson and defining what the functional requirements are for the future works at Henderson. My understanding is that they will then revert to government with advice on those requirements and on delivery options.
So that's the report, so that's the review that the government announced a few months ago now, $127 million for a 2-year review. So you're not expecting to hear anything back until at the end of that review, or do you expect at some point you will be engaged in what you potentially... I mean, I have always thought that it makes sense for you to take on a similar role at West as you do at Osborne.
Yes, Senator, I think the October announcement said $127 million was for further engineering work, but also some early works on site, and that was over a 3-year period. I don't expect that that government will wait 3 years, though, to make a decision on the delivery strategy. But I think that's really a question better put to Defence as to when those recommendations will go forward to Cabinet.
Okay. So, in terms of any more detail, so are you still doing some? You're still involved in the task force with the West Australian Government with JITSI?
Yes.
So, the good news is you're still engaged in that process, so you've got an awareness of what's happening. How it was described to me is that, yes, there are some early works to come out of that $127 million, but that it was actually funding a new study into with the WA state government now to work out who's doing what. Or does that not accord with your engagement with that task force?
Yeah, I think there's an aspect of it as to what should be delivered by the state and what should be delivered by the Commonwealth.
Yes.
There's an aspect of it which is looking at the requirements of shipbuilding, the requirements of submarine maintenance, so the AUKUS requirements, and determining what the actual infrastructure needs are, and that then will inform the delivery strategy.
So in terms of that, is that just looking at Henderson, or is that now looking at the broader infrastructure requirements in terms of road, rail, intermodal, all of those other sorts of facilities, or is it just the discussions that you're in just about Henderson itself, inside the wire?
No, the task force looks at all aspects of, I guess, enabling Henderson, including those aspects that you just mentioned, together with workforce and so forth.
Okay. So I was going to ask you a question about what workforce planning are you doing in Western Australia, but I suspect that's a little premature then, from what you've said?
That's right.
Okay. So have you got any insight in terms of the facilities that they're looking at? My understanding is that they're looking at, I think it was a contingent dock, 2 graving docks, and sort of extra hard standing, which would be available for Defence. Is that what your understanding is, the sort of facilities they're looking south, and north will then be a new civilian facility?
Yes, and I think the October 2024 announcement made it clear that they were looking at a defence precinct.
Yep.
And I think you're right in saying that would be to the south of the Henderson Strip. As to the exact requirements, I mean, I'm familiar with the Bechtel report, which had several options, so I'm familiar with that thought process. But as to the detail, is still being worked through by Defence, by NSSG, working with the ASA, and so I think specific questions would best be placed
Look,
with
thank
Defence.
you, and I will certainly be doing that tomorrow. But just a final sort of question then. So in terms of the discussions you're having, these ongoing discussions, is it being contemplated that you would take on a very similar role to Osborne in terms of the projects you would be responsible for delivering and then managing? So that defence, so basically that defence precinct, the new, whether the graving docks, floating docks, whatever, is that the sort of concept that's been looked at for you?
I think it's too early to tell, Senator.
Okay.
Yeah. I think as Mr Seaton said, it's early days, and the question of the model of delivery is a matter which is still being worked through by Defence and will need to come back to government, but is not far from
So are
concluded.
you involved in these discussions as well, Mr Medier?
We're involved in a range of discussions associated with what's going on at Henderson. Yes.
Okay. So the 127 million was for minor works plus, this ongoing body of work over. So I thought 2, but 3 years.
I think I thought it to be it's probably worth just checking that with Defence. It was a budget measure that went to Defence.
Yep.
So they'll be
So, but that was just to do this very specific package of work. In terms of provision for the many billions of dollars, particularly if there's going to be graving docks there and, there's a big change and movement and new nuclear safety requirements, my understanding is there's no provision in the budget yet for that scope of work. Is that correct?
Senator, I don't know that I can... it's a question I don't know the answer to be honest. That's a question best put to Defence.
With your Department of Finance?
Yes, and we
Correct.
fund and work with Defence on their IIP. As you know, that's built into the budget. But they, unlike other departments, who don't get that kind of forward planned money coming in, they have responsibility for managing within that.
Yes, but at the moment, my understanding is there is no provision for that, and there's provision for a few $1 billion worth of work on Sterling, but there is, in terms of the very large number of billions that will be required, there is not yet any provision for that in the IIP, and so presumably there is no other provision anywhere else for that work. Would that be a fair statement?
I think you'd have to ask that to Defence. We have, I think the figure I gave Senator Hume was a $38.7 billion increase to defence activities, including towards the government's $50.3 billion commitment over 10 years for the National Defence Strategy and Integrated Investment Program.
So that then wasn't in relation to your question on LOTE. So that was
in general how we've increased the defence budget over the last few budgets, and it's gone into the IIP, but it's been guided by obviously the decisions around the submarines, but also aligning with the defence strategy.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's answered the question, that there's not a specific allocation of money in the IIP or elsewhere for any of the works at Henderson yet, beyond some of the small things that they're going to do over the next 2 years. So is it my last question on this, so in terms of what is the time frame, is your understanding now of when something will be put to government in terms of the work, the plan and the cost, and when would they start to turn sod?
I think that's a question you'd have to put to Defence in terms of the timing.
Okay, so you've got no insight into that in terms of...
I don't know what I don't have a view. I don't have an insight into when what the Defence's current plans on timing of bringing back things for decision.
My final question is just following on from a line of questioning from Senator Hume to ASC in terms of the significant workforce industrial action they've had, and we've heard now that that's had at least a 7, if not much more, impact on the timing of the delivery back to Navy of their Collins class as they're coming out of full cycle docking. Have you had the opportunity to reflect on the problems they've had, and is there anything that you're taking out of that either for your South Australian workforce or potential West Australian workforce? Or it really hasn't come across your...
Senator,
value?
obviously I was aware of the PIA and the background and the negotiations, but there's no direct read-through for anything to do with A&I.
Thank you.
I have some questions just regarding some new appointments to the board. I understand that Mr Ronald Finlay, AM, has been appointed Chair. Major General Catherine Toomey, AM, CSC, has been appointed a Non-Executive Director, and Andrew Hall as a Non-Executive Director as well. I'd just like to put on the record, I think the committee's thanks to Ms Janice Van Ryck, in particular Mr Lucio Di Bartolomeo, whose name I have got wrong, I think now for about 5 years.
You're probably not the only one.
Oh, even more than that. He's been on the board since 2017. Obviously, he's made a very significant contribution. My question is about the onboarding process for new board members. Is there a formal onboarding process, and is there a different onboarding process or a more intense one for a new chair as opposed to board directors?
Our company secretary has managed an onboarding process for all 3 directors. Certainly the new chair has hit the ground running. He sat on the NCEP, the Expert Advisory Panel, for many years, and so he was well aware of the status of ANI's various projects and the strategic importance and so on and so forth. So he's certainly hit the ground running and has added a lot of value already in the time that he's been with us. But to answer your question, yes, there is an onboarding process, and that's playing through now.
I promise you, this is not a tricky question. I'm not trying to impugn anybody, so please don't let anyone's radars go up. I just want to understand the conflicts of interest process for new board directors. Is it the same as you would have for senior executives, for instance? Can you just talk me through that?
So as part of the recruitment, one of the key criteria was whether individuals had any conflicts of interest. And so all 3 of those new directors were cleared of conflicts. We have, at the start of every board meeting, as is usual, yes, we ask whether there's any specific conflicts, and if there are conflicts, then we determine how they should be managed.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Seaton. Thank you. That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you very much to ANI for your attendance at estimates this evening. I'm pleased to report we are running a little ahead of schedule, and so we can now ask the Future Fund Management Agency to come forward. How much do you think you've got?
4 lines, not too long.
Cool. And Jane, how long do you think we've got here? I'm just trying to work out if we'll.
A few questions for future.
Okay, so we'll take our evening tea break at 9:30 then. Still, okay. Before then, or because the scheduled one is for 9:30. I'm happy to.
You wanted to take it now and we can come back at 9:30, or if you wanted to just go with schedule, it's fine.
I just don't want to give up the break.
No, I was not at all suggesting that.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to... okay, I now welcome the Future Fund Management Agency, Dr. Raphael Arndt, CEO, and other officers of the Future Fund Management Agency. Do you have an opening statement this evening?
I do.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
The Future Fund produced an investment return of 12.2% in 2024, exceeding its mandate target of 6.4%. Returns for the past decade now average 8.1% per annum against a target of 6.8% per annum. Since inception, $177 billion has been added to the original contributions to the Future Fund, which now totals $238 billion. Across all 7 funds, we generated more than $32 billion in investment returns in 2024, and the total funds managed by the Future Fund Board of Guardians now exceeds $300 billion. These are strong results that reflect our prudent approach to investing and the work we have done over the past few years to understand the significant and lasting changes in the world and to position the portfolio accordingly. Globally, inflation is moderating, and economic growth, employment, wages and corporate balance sheets remain in good shape, underpinning another strong year for global equity markets. These conditions provided a lot of opportunity for active return generation, and the Future Fund benefited from increasing its allocation to international equities. At the same time, we remain aware of the need to navigate a fast-changing world, including the potential return of inflationary pressures and ongoing geopolitical uncertainty. We continue to work to ensure the portfolio remains resilient to a range of scenarios. In November, the government made a number of announcements regarding the Future Fund. Most significantly, the government advised that drawdowns from the fund would not commence until at least 2032-33. This provides the foundation for the Future Fund to become an enduring institution and the clarity to continue to invest for the long term. Under the new investment mandate, the board retains its long-standing duty to maximise returns while managing risk, and is now also asked to have regard to national priorities. As set out in the board's statement of intent, the board will assess appropriate investment opportunities in these areas, both in the context of the broader portfolio and the board's legislative obligations. Investments in national priorities will need to generate substantially the same risk-adjusted rate of return and other attributes as similar types of investments which might otherwise be considered by the board. I welcome your questions.
Thank you. I'll go to Senator Pocock first and then come back to you, Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for being here this evening. Just going to your statement there, Dr. Arndt, in your second to last paragraph where you speak of being asked now in that November statement to have regard to national priorities. How do you see those priorities and how have they affected the investment strategies at the fund?
Thank you, Senator. So there are three national priorities set out in the investment mandate: supporting the energy transition, increasing the supply of residential housing and delivering improved infrastructure in Australia. All three of those are areas that the fund has previously invested in, and so the board felt that they were areas where there were commercially attractive opportunities, but also where there was a need for capital in line with the government's priorities, and therefore there was alignment that the fund could be used to invest in those areas commercially. So to answer your question about how's it changed the investment strategy, to some extent we were already looking at those things, but with that, the double change, firstly the increased clarity and guidance, but secondly the deferral of drawdowns, that gives us a lot more runway in terms of knowing we've got the capital to invest for a longer time period. We're putting on some resources so that we can look for the commercial opportunities in those areas with a bit more attention and resource.
So you feel, can I just make sure I've heard you correctly, you're already moving in these directions and your longer runway means you now take a more long-term approach to those and your other body of investments. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. We always took a long-term approach, but if drawdowns had started, so the previous announced intention with drawdowns, recognising they weren't in the forward estimates in the last few years, was 26-27, which is only in a couple of years. And if we had to start positioning the portfolio to fund those drawdowns, we would have had to probably start selling some assets. So with this clarity, we don't have to do that and we can keep investing.
Can you drill down a little in relation to that first priority, energy transition? Tell us about how you've responded to that in particular.
You want to do that?
Yes, Ben Samwell, I'm the Chief Investment Officer. So we've been quite public and obviously very focused on energy transition as a really significant capital event that we obviously feel is extremely important to understand and participate in where relevant and viable and fit for our portfolio. So we're dedicating more resources to the specific opportunity set in energy transition that's generally seen as a sort of as an infrastructure-like investment, but what we see is that there are multiple opportunities across the risk scale in multiple instruments and across the globe, and we want to make sure that we're very across that opportunity set so that we can make a really appropriate assessment of the right sort of positioning for our portfolio.
That's a very general response to my question. Do you want to say anything more specific about the particular investments that you're shifting around in that category?
So we are adding resources internally to understand the program, so to understand the opportunity set, so that we can then, better analyse that opportunity set. Historically, we've been very involved in the opportunity set. There's an enormous amount of capital needed to exercise energy transition. We frequently find that is an attractive use of our capital, and that can be reasonably well rewarded. So providing capital for generation, either generally of renewable generation, providing capital to existing companies who are transitioning from, say, fossil fuel generation to something else, and various other opportunities across the spectrum which which populate our portfolio.
Thank you. I've asked some questions on notice that you have responded to. If I can just walk through a few of those. The question on notice response to FO30 was, in your answer to it, you state that the Future Fund voted against Whitehaven's remuneration report from 2021 to 23. Do you remember that response?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the rationale for voting against those reports in your mind?
I'll answer this one. So, just to take one step back, Senator, I'll come to your question. The energy transition is obviously very complex, and I'm sure people in this room could educate me to some extent on how complex. So what we're trying to do is understand across the full breadth of asset classes, of all the different investment strategies, how to avoid risk, how to take advantage of the opportunities that arise, which aren't black and white. They're very complex. They vary in different countries. The situation you refer to with Whitehaven, they're a listed equity in the Australian market. So the way we come to invest in that is through an allocation to equities overall, which is really a risk sizing decision for the fund and the board, then to an allocation to Aussie equities within that, and then we appoint a fund manager to do stock selection. And so we let the managers select which position we're holding. We do vote our shares directly, which I've explained here before. And so with Australian companies, and I have to admit I can't remember if Whitehaven is on the list of companies we let our managers vote on our behalf, or whether it's one we vote ourselves. That is decided according to a criteria of how large the exposure is and how significant a holder we are in the company. We would form a view based on proxy advice, the views of our fund managers, which they would recommend to us how to vote on the different resolutions that come up, and the board's voting principles, which are published on the website. So in respect of that specific resolution, you refer to the remuneration report at Whitehaven. I don't know the specifics, but they would have followed that process.
I wasn't asking about the process, Dr. Arndt. I was asking for the reason for why you voted that way, why the fund voted that way in those years.
Well, we would have voted that way because our proxy advisors and our fund manager recommended it, but I don't know the specifics of why.
And you didn't answer my question, and you're not answering my question now. Did you come prepared thinking that I might follow up on that one?
Well, I think we answered your question that you asked to the best ability that we have.
You didn't. You directed me to a website, a very inadequate response. You directed me to a website rather than actually giving me any reason.
I mean, we don't normally comment on specifics around views on specific companies, whether it be in how we vote or whether it be in engagement meetings that we have with those companies, because we feel that we are more able to influence companies by keeping those conversations private.
Tell me more about that. Why wouldn't the Australian public, it is a sovereign fund, why it is our money, have an interest in why you vote that way, or in the way you vote?
Well, the board's obligations are set out in the legislation and the mandate, which go to generating risk-adjusted returns over the long run.
For the benefit of future generations of Australians.
And that's what we're focused on. And so when we come to engage with a company, we're bringing the view of a long-term shareholder. We'll offer that view, and when they meet with us, we hope and expect that they will take our views into account. If every engagement is made public, we think, will, and some have expressed this view, will be less willing to meet with us. And we think that's not in the best interests of taxpayers in the long run.
Well, I've got to say, just tell me about what you did in relation to Whitehaven's remuneration report in 2024.
Well, I can't recall individual votes. I know that in the last published report, we voted against Whitehaven. I don't recall if that meeting was in 23 or 24, but we publish how we vote, every resolution at the end of the year.
And why would you talk generically if you're not comfortable to talk at Whitehaven? What would be the kinds of reasons that you're voting against them?
A remuneration report. So actually this year we provided more information and insight into why we voted particular ways in the report that we published on the website. Prior to the last year, we only reported the actual votes. This year we provided some commentary, including summaries of the key issues in the engagement meetings. Typically, we would vote against a remuneration report either because the metrics being applied for the senior management were not clear enough, were subject to too much discretion by the board and not transparent to the shareholders, or were misaligned with long-term value creation.
I've asked you previously, and this goes to other questions on notice I've put in, about how many times you've met with representatives from Woodside, Santos and Whitehaven, and I've asked you about the nature of those meetings. Your answers to these questions on notice come across to me as deliberately evasive, just not giving me the information that I'm asking for, which I think is a very fair set of questions to ask on behalf of the Senate and the taxpayer. None of the published documents referenced in your answers provided the information that I'm seeking. So I'm asking you again, how many times did the Future Fund meet with Woodside, Santos and Whitehaven in 2023 and 2024?
So I don't have that information here. I recognise that you asked it on notice, and the answer that we gave was around our overall engagement program and the total number of meetings we held, which from memory was approximately 50.
It's a global number.
Yeah, with about 30 companies. So it's on average 1 to 2 meetings per company. I don't have the information for any specific company, but again, the reason we responded the way we did is because we don't feel it's actually appropriate to provide that level of information, because we think that it may cause companies to not wish to meet with us.
You think someone who you are investing very sizable amounts of money with will refuse to meet with you?
So this is a behaviour we've observed in other parts of the world, for example, California, where state-based pension funds have very strict transparency regimes, and what tends to happen is companies seek to avoid meeting with them to have these sort of commercial conversations.
Are you saying to us, that you think Woodside, Santos and Whitehaven would refuse to meet with you if you published that you were meeting with them, just holding the meeting?
I can't answer that question.
I can't imagine that.
Well, I can't answer that question because we didn't ask them. I'm just speaking generally about behaviours we observe in these markets in other countries.
Did you think I would ask you about this tonight?
Well, I understand that you're interested in these topics, yes.
So you did think I'd ask you about it?
I didn't know what you were going to ask.
I think it's very disrespectful for you not to come prepared to do what I'm asking you. It's a very reasonable request.
Senator Pocock, yes. Look,
I think Dr.
I
Arndt
will...
comes here to assist the committee in his capacity. I don't think it's fair to cast that view on him.
Well,
Senator Pocock,
I think my question is not unreasonable.
Dr. Arndt's answer has gone to the public interest matters that affect the agency, but you're welcome to put the question again and get to the bottom of, you know, where the limit of that public interest test is in your exchange?
Well, I think it is in the public interest to know how many times you've met with those very large companies and the content, the topics of discussion. So I will continue to press, and I would like you to take on notice to provide a detailed answer to those questions. They are very large companies, the beneficiaries of an enormous amount of infrastructure within our country, and I think the taxpayers have a right to know the nature of your meetings and their frequency, and I'd seek you to provide that.
Understood.
Thank you. If I may move along, climate risk management and the models that you use for assessing climate risk and how they shape your investment strategies. Last time you appeared here, I asked about whether the fund has conducted any modelling of the impacts on its portfolio of changing climate scenarios. And Mr Samald told me, I think you will recollect, that the fund has a series of models. I'd like to know a bit more about these models. Which temperature outcomes or climate scenarios has the fund modelled in its portfolio?
We would, it's not specific, so we would have a range, so it would be, you know, positive, moderate, you know, poor, so anywhere between where we are now to worse, and then we have to try to model what the impact on policy would be, what the impact on capital would be, what the impact on interest rates, inflation, growth, productivity, you know, demographics, like migration, physical risk, you know, insurance costs, a whole series of very complicated and interactive things, and then come to some directional assessment of what that meant for global growth, global inflation, cost of capital, you know, price of money, that kind of thing.
And in general terms, what are the impacts on the fund's returns under each of these scenarios? You mentioned 3, I think.
Yeah, so I don't want to give the impression that we have like a binary, like it's either this or that. We're long-term investors, and we're trying to understand policy and direction of economics, direction of capital markets over time, and where risk premiums that we should accrue for providing capital will be best rewarded over time. What are the risks to those risk premiums? Climate change is one of those potential risks to those risk premiums, and all the capital and policy changes to deal with, you know, with that risk represent both opportunities and changes in capital markets that we have to try to understand. So we're not so brave as to try to put a point forecast or to understand specifically what the climate outcome will be and how that will directly map through to all of these interactive sort of elements of the economy. But what we try to do is say, okay, directionally, you know, if climate is here and policy is here, then roughly that would map to a risk premium expansion or compression, and then we should understand signposts to get it, you know, the signposts that we would understand as indicators of which path we're going down, and then be able to respond to those signposts.
So when I imagine your board asks you, if you look at a scenario of the high end of temperature change, for example, which we're obviously very many scientists think we're looking at, how do you reply? Do you reply by saying that there are penalties to earnings? What's your general response to the high-risk climate change scenario for your portfolio and its earnings?
So generally, the worst potential outcomes for climate and any other of these variables are clearly negative for returns. That would generally, the way we would think about it is that they would impact things like growth, productivity. It'll be quite inflationary. It would impact insurance costs, those kind of things. And then you would have to try to understand, well, how does policy respond to that in terms of government policy? How does private capital respond to it? What happens to interest rates? Do central banks respond to it? So we would try to model all that through and understand directionally, and and allocate capital in the most responsible way given those potential set of outcomes.
And do you use, for that kind of analysis, external asset consultants, or do you do that analysis entirely within the fund?
We generally do that because as it pertains to our specific portfolio, which we know best, and at a horizon that is fairly unique to us in a way of investing capital that's reasonably unique to us, we tend to do that internally.
Okay. I wonder, could you provide to me on notice the nature of the assumptions that you use in your modelling and key charts that compare portfolio impacts over time under the different scenarios? It's a question on notice. Thank you. I think that's me done.
Thank you. We'll now break for 15 minutes. Or
Coming back to the
yes, we are. And thank you. Oh. I do believe that Senator Pocock had a follow-up question before the return call goes back to Senator Hume. So, Senator Pocock, you have the call.
Of you to give me another shot. Thank you. This is a question in relation to the Glasgow Agreement. In the November 2024 estimates, I asked you about changes to the future fund investments in relation to obligations created by our signing up to the Glasgow Agreement. For context, the statement on international public support for the clean energy transition binds signatories, you may well be able to recite this in your sleep, to, quote, end new direct public support for international unabated fossil fuel energy sector investment within 1 year of signing of the agreement. Last year, Dr. Arndt, you told us the fund hadn't been told that there's a requirement to do anything different, that you're waiting for instruction from DFAT and or the Department of Climate Change. We've now passed that 1 year marker outlined in the agreement in December of last year. Has the Future Fund been directed to make any changes in its new investments as a result of our obligations, Australia's obligations, to ensure that there's no public support for fossil fuels?
Not directly, no.
Anything indirectly?
My understanding is there was some generic guidance published publicly around that, but nothing that seemed to apply to the Future Fund.
I wonder, Minister, if you can comment on that, given that we have signed the Glasgow Agreement, which has this obligation within it. Why hasn't there been a government direction to this very important fund to meet its requirements?
Well, as has been the subject of a bit of commentary, we have updated our investment mandate, that is, and our statement of expectations, which includes a small range of changes, including national priorities, including supporting an energy transition as part of the net zero transformation of the Australian economy, and some other elements to that. That is the formal way that the Treasurer and I have provided some direction to the Future Fund.
That's not exactly what we're required to do, however, under our obligations.
Well, that is the mechanism with which we do that, and that is available for people to see.
Do you intend to do anything further in relation to our obligations around the Glasgow Agreement?
In terms of advice to the Future Fund, that's reflected in the investment mandate and the statement of expectations.
And do you believe you're meeting the obligations we have under the Glasgow?
We've certainly outlined as a national priority the transition to net zero as a national priority for consideration by the Future Fund.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your answers tonight.
Senator Hume.
Thanks, Chair. Welcome. I want to ask you, just before we kick off, about the investment return of 12.2% in 2024, which is obviously excellent compared to your target of 6.4, so 12.2 compared to the target of 6.4. What were the asset classes that kicked that along?
Yes, I can answer that. We're very pleased because it was a diverse set of contributors across the portfolio. It was dominated by listed equities, which were extremely strong, returned about
domestic
20%.
Or international?
Both. Both. Global about 20%, domestic slightly short of that.
Any particular subsector?
Famously, the technology sector in the US has been an enormous driver of those returns. And the other parts of the portfolio were credit, infrastructure, and alternatives that were particularly accretive, and then and then there was a significant contribution from currency.
Okay, excellent. You said, and I'm sorry, forgive me if I wasn't listening properly, Mr. Samuel, that you had increased resources in response to the new change of investment mandate. In what areas have you increased resources?
So we plan on increasing resources to both the responsible investment team and a dedicated energy transition team.
Energy transition, responsible investment?
Yes. Okay.
Obviously, I want to ask some questions about changes to the operations and the investment mandate. The new mandate that requires the fund to consider national priorities. And you said residential housing, energy transition and infrastructure. Responsible investment isn't one of those, though.
So the statement of expectations that was provided also sets out, I think it calls it ESG, but we use the broader term responsible investment.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's just start on the investment mandate. It's now been approved and it's currently in operation, is that correct?
That is, yep.
And when exactly did it come into effect?
I don't have the exact date, but it was in November 2024.
19th of November 2024.
November, thank you. So what immediate actions did the fund do to ensure that it was actioning the new investment mandate?
So we've been working through with the board how we should change our processes, if any. We've started by focusing on increasing resources, which we've explained publicly. We already have some activity, however, in these areas, and we did, when we put our results, we explained that we had concluded investments in a toll road and in some student accommodation. Both of those were done prior to the mandate change, but they would both fit the national priorities.
Did you have to execute any specific trades immediately?
No.
Did you have to change any internal rules or internal processes, investment committee processes?
We're in the process of reviewing that, but I think we will include, at minimum, a commentary about whether a particular investment fits with the national priorities or not as part of that process.
Right.
We haven't changed hurdle rates or the way we analyse commercial issues.
So prior to the new investment mandate rules, what assets did the fund hold in residential housing?
It depends a little how you define it, but as I said, we've just made this investment in a large student housing portfolio nationally. We also, I think, explained at the time that we have quite a large exposure to a timber plantation business that makes building materials that go to housing, and we have some investments in some specialist housing, particularly land lease and sort of assisted living type areas. We have historically had some exposure to bulk land type strategies.
Sorry, bulk land, did you say?
Yeah, so you buy land, divide it up, connect the infrastructure and then on-sell it to developers. That we haven't done that strategy for some years.
Why is that?
It was commercially attractive. It became less attractive over time, just given where the market had moved. And we do invest in build-to-rent projects offshore fairly extensively, so, but not in Australia. So we have been in conversation with our investment managers who do those projects offshore to see whether we can find commercially sensible investments to make in Australia.
But residential housing was always an investable asset class for you?
Well, yes. I mean, it was part of the universe, yes.
Yes, okay. So when you examined potential deals in this space, what were or what are, I suppose, the risks, and what are the reasons why you haven't pursued deals in the past?
So for a large institutional investor, things like single-family homes, houses aren't particularly attractive because, one, they're in high demand. I think everyone in the country knows that, and it's not a particularly efficient market to get large licks of capital away. So we've been more focused on multi-family accommodation projects, both offshore and in Australia. In Australia, the dynamic in the market has tended to be ones that favour developers looking for a quick turn, not long-term ownership.
Right.
So they haven't been particularly attractive. As I said, we've found some bespoke opportunities in the past. There are some regulatory and rule setting changes that are making build-to-rent more attractive in Australia. We haven't done one of those yet, but as I said, we're starting to look at them with our managers.
It would be unusual, I think, in Australia for fund managers to invest in existing housing stock, wouldn't it not?
Well, historically, yes,
Yeah.
but there are markets have ups and downs, and so depending on what happens, certainly we're finding that in other countries we have made investments in not so much single houses, but apartment buildings and the like.
Okay. So you've updated the committee on the future funds holding in assets that exist in the energy transition before. Perhaps could you just list those that you hold now, just briefly for completeness?
Well, the ones, I mean, we own assets in the listed market. We own assets through fund managers, private equity and infrastructure funds. So the ones we've previously talked about are indirect, large directly owned infrastructure assets primarily. I'm going off memory here, Senator, but they mainly are in transport and telecommunications infrastructure as it's happened. We have looked at energy assets in the past, and without going into the details, we're looking at some at the moment.
Okay. Are you looking at some at the moment in response to the change in mandate?
I think the ones we're looking at started prior.
Okay. Do you think that the change in mandate will have any impact on your appetite in that sector?
I probably wouldn't use the word appetite. I think our biggest constraint is our resources, because there's many investment opportunities all the time, and then we have to go through a process of weighing up which ones are the most attractive for the portfolio. We've already said quite publicly that we wouldn't invest in assets which are in the national priorities unless they stacked up and were comparable to other assets. I think the big challenge for us will be having more resources to search out and look for those opportunities. The example I gave before was we're starting to talk to our real estate managers about build-to-rent opportunities in Australia.
Okay. So prior to the new investment mandate, what assets did the Future Fund hold in local infrastructure as opposed to energy transition? You said just before roads and
so in terms of the large directly held infrastructure assets, which we report in the 6 monthly reports, it was about $12 billion in equity value, which was about half the infrastructure portfolio. The biggest exposures are Melbourne and Perth Airport, the CDC data centres, there's a mobile phone tower network, there's the timberland I referred to before, the Port of Melbourne, and we just announced an investment in the Eastlink toll road.
Do they, what falls under the category of economic resilience and security infrastructure? Is that where those assets fall? That doesn't sound...
well, there's some definitional information in the investment mandate itself, which we're still working through. But I think most of those assets would comply with the definition.
Okay.
So the investment mandate says infrastructure includes transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, communication infrastructure, water infrastructure, and economic resilience and security infrastructure.
So economic resilience, I'm reading this too. Economic resilience and security infrastructure focuses on sectors of the economy where having some level of domestic capability is necessary for or an efficient way to improve the resilience and security of the economy. So what is that? Is that defence industry? Is it cyber sectors? What is it? In your mind, what does that mean?
Well, we haven't set out to determine a definition, but I suppose, for example, the plantation asset I referred to also owns sawmilling operations, which go to domestic housing supply, which are made locally.
I'm not entirely sure that domestic capability or economic resilience comes from timber mills. Do you think that sounds a bit traditional, doesn't it? I reckon that they probably had grander investments in mind?
Well, if you're asking me to interpret the legislation, I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that.
Well, I think you have to, don't you? I mean, that's your mandate that's in that legislation, so... Well, let me put the question to you differently. Do you own cybersecurity assets?
We certainly own companies that are active in cybersecurity space through our venture capital program, yes.
Data centres?
Yes.
Okay. And clearly, just from the way you've answered those questions, it doesn't sound like the new investment mandate has changed the way you invest in those sectors.
No.
Right. Okay. The definition of energy transition in the mandate states that energy transition covers increasing the overall use of renewable and low emission energy sources, increasing the capacity and efficiency of Australia's energy infrastructure, and decreasing Australia's overall reliance on high-emission energy sources, including by developing and improving technology to achieve that objective. Broadly, the definition is intended to cover Australia's shift towards an energy mix that has a greater reliance on renewable energy sources. The note to the definition clarifies that the energy transition to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 may also involve the use of medium emissions energy sources to decrease Australia's overall carbon emissions during the transition period. Does that sound like gas?
Well, the board hasn't as yet developed its strategy on these assets and on how it would interpret the mandate, but on the face of it, I would say gas is a transition fuel, yes.
Yeah. And do you have investments in gas currently?
Yeah, we do.
Sorry?
We do.
You do? Okay. What about carbon capture and storage?
I don't know whether we have exposure to that. We may well through the private equity or venture capital program. We have had similar exposures in the past.
Are there... Sorry? Did you... Oh, sorry. I thought there was additional comments there. Okay. Are there any assets or investments that you are now looking at, given the new investment mandate, that you were not looking at under the old investment mandate?
I don't believe so. As I said before, we're just building out our capability to start to put more resources on seeking commercial opportunities in these areas.
Right. Okay.
I don't think it will necessarily mean we would do things differently, because if something's a commercial and attractive investment, we would have made it anyway, but we'll have more capability and we'll probably prioritise those investments more than we did previously.
Allow me to ask a really boring accounting question then. If you haven't changed the capability, if you haven't really changed your investment pool, but you are expanding your resources to increase capability, are you taking resources away from another area, or are you simply expanding your cost base to invest in essentially the same things as you were investing in before the change in the mandate?
So we're actually going through that process right now, looking at that, and we do our resource plans and budgeting on the financial year, so we'll be talking to the board about that in the next few months.
Right. Okay. Is there a way that we can see what the cost of your investment, how the cost of doing business for you has changed over time between prior to the change of the mandate and after the change of mandate? Will that be sort of clear by looking at an MER, or is there something that we'll be able to see in the annual report that will show that shift?
We have investment manager costs, which are reported in the annual report. So if we have new strategies that are more or less expensive than the average, that would show up there. In terms of the resources in the agency, that would show up in the corporate plan and in the accounts.
Right. Okay. So following the announcement from the government on the new investment mandate and the statement of expectations, there was a fair bit of public commentary, and I'm sure you're aware of that commentary. For the sake of Hansard, Dr. Arndt is nodding.
Yes.
David Murray, who was the first chair of the Future Fund, said that this decision, and I'm quoting him here, decision is not a good thing for the long-term returns, and it undoes all the work that we put in since 2006 to get this fund set up with a fantastic international reputation. Minister, is David Murray wrong?
Oh, well, I disagree with him on that.
So he's wrong?
Well, I think, the line of questioning before this has been that it's been a modest change, and, to some of Dr. Arndt's answers, it hasn't changed enormously, the approach they're taking. So we said that at the time. We thought these were important national priorities, but that returns were always the priority for the Future Fund. And I really don't know what people can argue with about identifying transition to net zero, increasing the supply of residential housing and delivering improved infrastructure in Australia. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find people who would criticise those as national priorities.
Well, I suppose the reason I ask is if there was a dramatic change in the Future Fund, which has been such a successful fund, in 3 months since the change in investment mandate. Well, that would be a damning indictment. So I'm not entirely sure that 3 months...
That's not the evidence that you've heard tonight, and it's not what we expected to happen and what we said at the time.
I'm so... Can I tell you, you would have been hearing from us a hell of a lot earlier if we saw that the future fund was tanking after 3 months after investment mandate change. So we're not there.
Can we just talk about the investment returns for this year? Over 12%, so hardly aligns with any concern about that.
What was the date?
The last 12 months, wasn't it?
What was the end date for that?
That was for the year to December.
So the investment mandate had been in place for a month and 10 days. Mr Murray also said that the new mandate appears to be in conflict with Section 18A of the Future Fund Act. The Future Fund Act, Section 18A, states that responsible ministers must not give a direction under subsection 18(1) that has the purpose or is likely to have effect of directly or indirectly requiring the board to allocate financial assets to a particular activity. Has the Future Fund, or indeed has Finance, sought advice on that particular matter?
Well, Finance advised us, or me, and Treasury advised the Treasurer on changes to the investment mandate. So, again, I don't agree with Mr Murray with respect.
So is that advice has been received that says that the mandate doesn't contravene subsection 18(1) of the Act?
We were provided with advice about how to amend amend the investment mandate, which hadn't been, I think, amended for a long time, and a statement of expectations in accordance with the law, as you would expect from departments.
Okay. So, did the Future Fund seek advice on that?
So our chairman's actually on the record on this point, and so the board did satisfy itself, including with advice, that the change in the mandate was in accordance with the legislation.
So the former chairman of the Future Fund, Mr Peter Costello, also made comments following that announcement, and he said that the new investment mandate, I'm quoting him here, breaks nearly 20 years of bipartisan agreement that the fund should not be directed at specific investments or specific sectors. It undermines the independence of the fund as the government nominates its designated areas for investment. It opens the door for future governments to direct the fund assets into their priorities according to the whim of the day. It lessens the respect the fund will enjoy internationally now that its independence has been clipped, and it opens the door for off-budget subsidies to be provided to pet projects through concessional debt or equity instruments owned by the Future Fund. He also made other statements, but I don't think we'll go into those. Minister, do you want to respond to those critiques?
I've read Mr Costello's piece on it. We're not directing the Future Fund. The investment mandate, so I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding. The investment mandate changes require the board to consider national priorities as part of their investment strategy in maximising returns to the fund. So I'm not surprised, Mr Costello doesn't agree with this, but that doesn't mean that it is wrong to have national priorities like this. And I would say to you, Senator Hume, do you disagree that infrastructure located in Australia, residential housing, should be national priorities? I can understand you probably don't agree with the net zero transformation, even though that was part of your party policy for a long time. But really, these are areas where there's huge opportunity. I think if you look at sovereign wealth funds around the world, this would not be unusual to have priorities listed in investment mandates, but ultimately it's the board that makes those decisions.
So one day, hopefully you'll get a chance to ask me questions at this desk rather than the other way around, but in the meantime I get to ask the questions. And
yes, I've been enduring that since 9 a.m. this morning.
It's part of the gig.
But
if you don't like it, too hot before you get out of the kitchen, my friend.
Whilst you're drawing up your curtains for your ministerial suite.
According to your social media, it looks like you're taking the curtains down already. Anyway,
can I just yourself?
That was a good line.
Can I just...
Please, go and amuse yourself. I'm so pleased you get so much enjoyment from my social media. Keep looking at it because you drive attention to it.
It was just a screenshot and it was shared amongst coalition senators. But anyway...
Senators,
how funny. Ho, ho,
it
ho.
was.
Senators,
Anyway,
I would like to draw you back to questions and answers. Otherwise, I'm sure...
So I suppose...
Senators.
Sounds like bullying.
Minister and Senator Hume, both of you please come to order. It's no longer entertaining having the to and from across the table, given it's now 10:15. It would be much better if you're efficient in questions and answers so that we can try and go home at a reasonable hour. Can I quickly inquire, are you expecting to...
Go till 11, yes.
Probably past 11,
Well,
too.
It's all right, you were late back from the break, so I feel like we've got some minutes to make up.
Yeah.
So...
I was in fact back early on a number of other breaks today, but in any case, you know, when you verbal me like that, I might just keep talking as chair. And given you are going to be here till 11 o'clock in any case, I would think that if you want things to be efficient, then you need to demonstrate courtesy to me as chair and to other committee members.
It should be reciprocated.
Okay, I just wanted to ask quickly, are you expecting to ask questions of the DTA this evening?
Yes.
And when do you expect we might call them?
10:30 when they're scheduled.
Okay. Thank you very much. And you can continue with the call. Senator Hume.
Thank you. Can I ask, Minister, did you speak to the former chairman, Mr Costello, before this mandate was confirmed?
No, and I think he wrote that in his opinion piece.
He didn't reach out to you?
Well, I think he wrote that in his opinion piece in the AFR.
Did he reach out to you or did you reach out to him?
No.
So you didn't feel the need to consult with the current chair of the Future Fund when you were changing the mandate?
I don't believe he was the current chair. I think he had left...
He was the past chair by that stage?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I had met with Mr Costello, with the Treasurer, when he was the current chair, but I believe... when did Ms Combe, he was June?
Yeah.
June,
yeah.
So you didn't flag it with the previous chair before he left, that you were considering changing the mandate of the Future Fund?
No.
Okay. Can I ask about the statement of expectations? Perhaps, Dr Arndt, you could just briefly run through the changes in that new statement and what they mean?
Well, the statement of expectations refers to a lot of the legislation and regulatory context that already existed, so it's just clarified in one place. It introduces and explains the national priorities that are set out in the investment mandate, and it asks us to, or the board, to publish a number of its policies, which we do, and then the other new piece is on the ESG, or environmental, social and governance matters, is the heading, and it asks the board to ensure it has a policy and to publish that policy.
Okay. So the statement notes that the board is expected, subject to its obligations under the enabling legislation and investment mandate directions, to consider Australia's economic prosperity by having regard to national priorities when making and managing investments. The national priorities are supporting net zero energy transition. It's part of the net zero transformation of the Australian economy, increasing the supply of residential housing in Australia and delivering improved infrastructure located in Australia. Have you changed your behaviour at all as an executive in response to this inclusion in the statement?
Well, it's consistent with the change in the investment mandate. So I think my previous answer applies here as well, which is that we've introduced some additional sections of our investment papers to explain if an investment is within one of those categories, and we're still going through any other changes to the processes that are required.
So it's changes to procedures, but it hasn't really impacted your actions?
No.
When the government was spending Department of Finance time and resources developing the new statement and investment mandate, did you have an opportunity to tell them what the impact would be? And did you say that this won't impact what it is we're doing now?
We didn't have that specific conversation, but there were a number of engagements between both the Department of Finance and the Treasury and the Future Fund agency officers on the various pieces of the investment mandate and statement of expectations. There was an opportunity to give feedback about which parts of that would impact the investment program, whether there were likely to be commercially available opportunities in those areas, and whether, in the board's opinion, we thought it was consistent with the legislation, which says that the primary focus is to maximise return without taking excessive risk.
So, Minister, what was the objective here? Was the objective for the Future Fund to keep going, as it very successfully was prior to the change, or was the objective for the Future Fund to change what it does?
The objective was to identify and be quite specific about national priorities we would like the Future Fund to consider as part of their investment strategy.
So if it doesn't do anything, why did you do it?
You can't have it that the sky's falling in because we changed the investment mandate and
I'm
then
not saying the
argue
sky's
that's
falling
nothing.
in.
Well, I think your comments
No,
when
it
we
weren't
changed
mine. They
it
were
was
Peter
pretty...
Costello's and David Murray's, but
you,
my
you
comments
and
are...
Mr Taylor were on the
Which
record
one?
about it, and you can't have it both ways. Like,
well,
it's just an impossible argument for you to run that nothing's changed, but the sky's fallen in because you've changed the investment mandate.
No, I'm interested to know, if you knew it wasn't going to change anything, why did you do it?
Well, we said at the time that we believed it was modest changes to identify these priorities in line with many sovereign wealth funds. We don't believe it's just a set and forget, that the government should be able to identify priorities of national significance. We've done that, but we've also made clear that the priority is on investment returns. They're an expert body, the Future Fund, been very successful in generating returns on investment for the country, and that will continue.
So the statement also includes that the responsible ministers also expect the board, through the agencies, subject to any confidentiality constraints, to engage in knowledge sharing and collaborative consultations with the government's special investment vehicles on the national priority investment areas listed in the Future Fund investment mandate direction and on broader investment market global trends. So how does that work in practice?
Is that a question for
Yes,
me,
sorry,
Senator?
Doctor.
We feel like we have some insight into the operation of global financial markets. So, for example, how available is debt and equity funding for renewable energy generation, just as an example. And so we do meet with some of the specialist investment vehicles from time to time and share insights into the markets broadly. And we've continued to do that.
So it's sort of sitting around having a yarn saying...
Well, it's a little more than that, because I think we think we have some specific information that might be of interest or relevance to them about global appetite for the sort of areas that they operate in.
Right. So how does it work with the independent fund managers that you employ?
Well, we don't direct investing in that respect. We have connected some of the specialist investment vehicles with some of the fund managers where they operate in the space.
Right. Okay, so you're currently working on some deals or investments with government funds, is that right?
No, that's not what I'm saying. So, for example, we have real estate managers working in the build-to-rent space. We're not directing them to do that type of investing for us, but we nevertheless think that that might be information that's interesting to Housing Australia, for example. Right. So we just give them the connection.
Okay, so do they reach out to them, or do you reach out to them? Do they reach out to you? How does that work?
Both.
Right. Okay. In the event that you are considering an investment, or that your fund managers are considering investments, do you check with other government fund vehicles to see if they're considering the same investment?
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
It's about sharing of expertise. And, why wouldn't you? I mean, it just makes sense.
So how do you manage that without breaking relevant confidentiality arrangements or exclusive due diligence arrangements?
Well, we wouldn't be talking to the specialist investment vehicles about specific investment opportunities, more about the market as a whole, market dynamics.
Okay. So could there be a situation then where the Future Fund is considering an investment but is in competition with, with another government fund that you could envisage?
You mean a specialist investment vehicle? I haven't heard of a situation where government funding would be available, for example, for one bidder in a process and not other bidders. So usually they would make some concessionary finance or whatever the arrangement is available to the asset or the idea in general to all bidders. But that's really an issue for them.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have for the Future Fund. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you to the Future Fund for your participation at this estimates. I know the Digital Transformation Agency will be on their way in. Cute. Thank you. I welcome Mr. Chris Fechner, Chief Executive Officer, and other officers of the DTA. Good evening. Mr. Fechner, do you have an opening statement this evening?
No, thank you, Chair.
Senator Hume, and I would. Okay, Senator Chandler.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to ask some questions about Digital Marketplace 2. My understanding is that the DTA last year conducted a process to develop DMP2 suppliers panels, develop the DMP2 supplier panel for ICT providers and professional services. Is that correct?
Yes. Chris Fechner, Chief Executive, Digital Transformation Agency. Yes, Senator, that's correct.
Thank you. Are you aware of concerns from businesses and even some government departments that there were some very highly qualified Australian suppliers who were on the DMP1 panel but haven't been selected for the new panel?
Senator, yes, we were aware of some providers who were on Marketplace 1. Which had been in operation for several years and was required to be refreshed, and that were not successful in DMP2. There were several reasons that contributed to that, including some of the mandatory requirements for statements of tax compliance that were obliged by Treasury as part of our activities. There were also there was also a requirement for us to change some of the parameters between Digital Marketplace 1 versus Digital Marketplace 2 to take into account some of the feedback that we'd had from that panel over the years. We created different subcategories in there to allow for a broader type of application that was coming in, and we requested relevant case studies and referees to be involved with the selection of those. As a result of the evaluation of some of those responses, some failed some of the technical requirements that were minimum mandatory components, such as a statement of tax compliance. Others did not provide sufficient evidence to get above the threshold on the evaluation to make it. And it could have been that they were successful in some subcategories but unsuccessful in others. And I think there were some cases that people were unsuccessful altogether.
So, just for the record, how many suppliers were in DMP1 and how many are now in DMP2?
Senator Wayne Pools, General Manager, Digital Investment Advice and Sourcing. I'll come back to the numbers just in terms of where we're currently at with DMP2, the second iteration.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's about 834 applications for the ICT labour hire, and there's about 4,814 on the professional services. I'll just double check the numbers in terms of the original DMP2 altogether, if you give me a second.
Mm-hmm.
I've got it. They're closed. DMP2 opened with 1,609 sellers.
Mm. Are you concerned that we're running the risk that highly specialised businesses in areas like cybersecurity aren't able to tender for work currently with the government because they've missed out on this panel for... I understand why you have the process, but some of these seem pretty minor administrative issues in terms of the application process.
So with respect to the statement of tax compliance, it was at the time it was a mandatory obligation. We weren't allowed to, it was not a decision by the DTA, it was a decision passed to us by Treasury.
Right.
And there was a requirement that participants complied with that. That was well and truly communicated for months and months before the closure of that process, and that did result in a portion of the respondents being eliminated in the qualification stage, not the evaluation stage.
That's a bit concerning though, and it's a condition that's been thrust upon you by Treasury, not something that DTA's thought of themselves, I'm guessing.
Not at all, Senator. We have all of the DTA's panels conform with the finance directions on the contract terms and conditions.
Mm-hmm.
They also comply with some of the legal requirements that come to us from Attorney Generals. So there is, it's sort of routine for us to actually have aspects of our structures with directions from authorities from other agencies and departments.
What can businesses do now then if they've missed out on this first iteration of the panel and they might be missing out on work that under the old panel arrangements they otherwise would have had fair and reasonable access to bid for?
So there are probably two parts to that answer. The first one is that entities were still able to contract on the DMP1 right up until I think it was the 31st of January 2025, so it's only recently. So in the cases where you talked about people who had been successful on DMP1 and DMP2, they still had the access of using Digital Marketplace 1.
Well, they don't now because it's the 25th of February.
And again, we have gone from an always open, which was, again, one of the things that we needed to change between Digital Marketplace 1 and Digital Marketplace 2, to often open. And since that original closed round, we've opened and closed the panel again, and we're evaluating the next ones where we had a significant number of people reapply in that particular thing. And there has been a change to the requirements in the statements of tax compliance to only require it when at the point of contracting rather than at the point of application to the panel. So that has made it a little bit simpler for agencies to go through, because the ATO provides those statements of tax compliance, and it can be a bit of a backup sometimes as well.
Just on that, how easy would it be for DTA to go to the ATO and be able to get that information rather than getting businesses to do it?
So the ATO have got some very, very strict requirements on being able to provide information that's been for a particular purpose, for an alternative purpose, and we needed to get the vendors to provide it to us because it's not available through the ATO directly. It would be nice if it was, but it's not.
And can I just make the point that businesses can continue to tender for government work? Like, being on the digital marketplace is not mandatory, or that you can be excluded from other tender processes. So those businesses can.
Helps to be on there though, doesn't it?
Well, all I'm saying
that's the
is if they haven't met the requirements to be on the digital marketplace too, that does not necessarily exclude them from being able to tender for government work. Well, it doesn't exclude them.
And it's worthwhile mentioning there has been some vendors that have approached the Senator, and we've actually worked with the relevant agencies to put them in contact to help them get access through a direct sourcing approach. in particular. Yep.
So just so I'm very clear, if someone missed out on DMP2 because there was an issue around their statement of tax compliance, obviously they currently can't get work through DMP2, but as of now, under this new process, that statement isn't actually required until the point of contracting with the government?
It's at the point when we close it, the actual close a tender application process for having assessed all the applicants and established that next part of the panel. So it's a slight deviation from when the point in time occurs, but it's still a requirement that they have the statement of tax record.
Yes, but the point at which they have to provide it to you has now changed.
There's more flexibility in result of Treasury changes.
So that's right. It wouldn't have eliminated them in the pre-qualification stage as it did in the first version of it.
Are you concerned that there is, I mean, you know, we've talked about the fact that there's a reduction in providers on the DMP2 versus DMP1. Are you concerned around reduced competition for government contracts, particularly in highly specialised fields?
So we've had an overwhelming response from the marketplace to not just our digital marketplace, but to our other panel environments, our hardware panels, our software panels, our recent ERP panels. With the sourcing arrangements that the DTA puts in place, there's a very large percentage of SMEs. I think realistically about 80% of our participants on all of our panel arrangements are SMEs. And in the last iteration of DMP2, that percentage was even higher. It was closer to 90% that were SMEs. So we believe that the mechanism of open often, multiple subcategories, standardised terms and conditions to allow suppliers to only have to deal with terms and conditions once rather than with multiple individual direct approaches to market actually reduces the burden significantly on suppliers to interact with government. And the fact that agencies don't need to have got a catalogue where they can search for capabilities by subcategory means that it's much easier to find them. So one of the big improvements in DMP2 was the inclusion of case studies and references to allow people to search on particular search terms and go into subcategories that could allow them to do it, whereas in the previous one, you really had to know what type of vendors you were and dig much deeper into the process. So we think that the processes and following the opening of DMP2, we also got significant feedback from people like the Australian Information Industry Association. We engaged heavily with feedback and those things, and we made improvements to the workflow on DMP2. And we also tried to work with our colleagues in different agencies to make sure that things like statement of tax compliance didn't actually be the first hurdle that they couldn't get over rather than the last one.
Just moving on to another topic, I have some questions about AI that I'm hoping DTA can answer for me. Why is it that there are more than 20 federal government agencies currently using AI without having internal policies in place to manage its use?
Senator, are you referring to the ANAO audit report?
I think, yes, indeed, that is exactly what I'm referring to.
So at the time where the ANAO did the review of AI that was largely worked on the ATO's work, the responsible use of AI in government policy had not yet been adopted. So it came into effect in the last quarter of last year. When ANAO was doing that report on the policy work associated with AI in governments, they did not actually directly engage with the DTA. It was only when that report was published that we were actually given the details of that. Subsequent to that, we've actually got the statement of, the responsible use of AI in government policy that's out. The first, and it has two standards associated with it, the accountable official standard and the transparency standard. The accountable official standard came into effect in November 24, and we've got very high compliance with that standard. In fact, we have 88 of 92 entities that are covered in that standard that have complied with the standard. And we have the transparency standard, which comes into mandatory effect from the 28th of February this year. And we have agencies working with us on an individual basis to get those transparency standards out. So we're also working on aspects of AI technical standards, and we're doing work on a a voluntary AI assurance framework that allows agencies to evaluate use cases, assess risk in those environments, and look at the life cycle approach to continuous safety and effectiveness evaluation of AI in their use cases.
How many agencies haven't met the transparency standard yet?
So the transparency standard comes into effect from the 28th of February of this year. So we're working with agencies, and we've written out to agencies to ask for their assistance in meeting their obligations on the transparency standard. The one that is in effect now is the accountable official standard, and there's 88 of 92 that have applied to that.
Which are the 4 that haven't complied to that one?
So the way that we did this work was we went through to portfolio agencies to make sure that there was distribution of that. The 4 entities that there are very minor entities, and if I can get Ms Mills to come back up, I might just get her to tell you the 4 agencies. But we are working directly with those 4 agencies, and I will say that they're very small agencies.
Sure.
To make sure that they can comply with that standard.
Good evening, Laura Mills, Branch Manager of Strategy and Prioritisation at the Digital Transformation Agency. I'll just have that information for you in a moment. Certainly 4 small entities that we've not been able to contact directly to assure their appointment of an accountable official under the policy. Those are the Office of the Australian Accounting Standards Board, the Office of the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, the Office of the Inspector General of Aged Care, and the Organ and Tissue Authority.
Thank you. Just on the transparency statements, so how many agencies as of, I know that it's not technically compulsory until the 1st of March, how many agencies as of today have published their mandatory transparency statement?
11 agencies have published already, Senator.
11 out of how many will ultimately have to publish their statements?
Well, there'll be 92 that will be as per the accountable official numbers.
They'll have to get busy in the next 3 days.
The DTA is one of those agencies that has published their transparency standard, just in case you're thinking of that.
Someone might be uploading that quickly now. You said that you were having conversations with agencies around their ability to comply with this requirement. Are you expecting any agencies will miss the deadline and fail to publish those statements in however many days we decided it was, 3 days?
So the answer is absolutely. We expect that there will be some agencies that have trouble meeting their obligation under that standard, and the DTA will follow up and work with those agencies individually to assist them in getting it there.
Are you in a position to say which agencies you're concerned about?
Well, it hasn't actually come to the compliance date yet, Senator.
How many agencies are we talking about? Half of them? A couple of them?
So what I can say is across all of our engagements across the APS, there's been very high engagement on the topic of AI. There's been lots of interest in it. There's been participation broadly. The transparency standard is really something that I think works in the interests of all agencies. So it talks about what you're using AI for and what types of AI you're using largely in that space, and it talks about the protections that agencies are putting in place to ensure the safety and security of the people that are impacted by these things. So we think that on the whole that all agencies believe there are merit in the standards, and we've had positive feedback in that space. There is often a lot of administrative controls that go through on publishing things, and often those things can get in the way of it. But we talk at an AI forums, we talk at different groups. We've supported them with assistance on how to create their transparency standards. They're a simple activity about deploying on their websites. So we actually believe that most agencies will be seeking to comply with it, but they will probably work to the compliance date to get it through their
It's a mandatory statement, though. I mean, it would be pretty unacceptable if they missed the deadline, surely.
Yes.
We want agencies to be compliant, which is why we've set the deadline. That's why we set the time frame.
Okay. That's all from me, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hume.
Thank you.
I asked this question of Finance and they directed me to you, so I hope to goodness I'm in the right place. What oversight does Finance have of the whole of... Oh, sorry. So I asked Finance whether they had oversight over the whole of government ICT. They directed me to you, so they say that you have oversight of that. Please say yes, excellent, thank you. So can you then tell me about the preparations that the government's undertaking to migrate departments and agencies from the SAP legacy ERP system as that ceases to be supported?
Yes, we've got some fairly detailed planning and activities around that particular space. So I'll start with the fact that we have a whole of government arrangement with SAP. Yep. Through that arrangement with SAP, we've been able to secure a extension to support up until the end of 2029 to allow a longer window of transition for those people who are currently on-premise ECC instances of SAP that will run out of support.
Can I just clarify? It was 2027 and now they've extended it to 2029?
So the actual end of support date for SAP's ECC environments is still 2027.
Right.
The DTA, in conjunction with a number of government agencies, including the Department of Finance, we've been able to negotiate into our whole of government agreements extended support through to December 2029. And it's also important to note that not all instances of SAP that are currently operating are subject to that particular problem. Anybody who is running an SAP HANA instance has got support out to 2032, I think is the date, or 2030. And we also have some environments that where they're transitioning out of SAP into other technologies. So the second dimension that I'd probably bring up is the DTA has run an ERP panel, so part of a government decision on the move away from GovERP into choice within agencies on their use of ERP, required a mandatory panel to be set up for multiple ERP suppliers and ancillary services to ERP suppliers, and we've gone through 2 iterations of that. We've also, so the third step is that we've been doing work with the Secretary's Data and Digital Committee and most recently the COO Committee, the Chief Operating Officers Committee. It's a subcommittee of the Secretary's Board, to do coordination of I suppose the scheduling that's going to be necessary and the readiness associated with transition of ERPs from one older version to whatever the newer version is, and they're not always going to be directly SAP to SAP. There will be other ones, so we've got multiple ERP providers, I think, on those environments. The other aspect is that the DTA has, within its investment planning, we've got a requirement for agencies to give us forward planning on their approaches to transitioning their ERP. So we've been collecting for probably a couple of years now all of the details of agencies that have got a desire to move or to do their migrations. And we're also working with the Department of Finance with small agencies who are running a PMO to provide support, project support and operations about transitioning small agencies who don't necessarily have the scale and I suppose maturity of entities like Defence and Services Australia and ATO to run those on their own. And finally, I think that the last part that we're looking at is we continue to engage with SAP. In fact, we're organising a forum with SAP on it and all government agencies so that we can bring together all of the entities that are looking to move from old SAP to a newer SAP, with SAP engaged in that conversation to support them and provide our government agencies with details on how they can safely and securely migrate from the unsupported versions to a supported version.
Okay. The extension until the end of 2029, that my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that it costs an additional incremental 2% in maintenance fees. Is that right?
I thought it was 2.5%.
We'll take that on notice, but there is an increase in maintenance fees, yes. And it is to the end of 2030, just to clarify.
So it's the end of 2030, not the end of 2030, not the beginning of 2030. Okay, sorry.
And Senator, that is so. This is a term called extended support, and extended support in very much all major software and hardware supplies. Extended support always incurs a premium to ensure that the staff that they would normally used to support the in-service things are continuing to be applied to the out-of-service products.
How many departments and agencies operate using the legacy ERP systems that are supported by SAP?
So we do...
I have to take that up. I'm thinking mid-20s are currently running an SAP environment, or at least when we were sort of negotiating the SAP contract. There might have been a few that have moved in the interim, so I'd have to take that on notice to find out what the current number is.
So the other thing to understand in that is that SAP instances in some cases are done as shared services arrangements. So, for instance, finance through its service delivery office provides an SAP instance for multiple entities.
Right.
So those entities will be serviced by the changes in that environment. So it won't necessarily be a one-to-one agency to SAP instance.
Right.
And as I said, some of the instances that we have actually meeting the support thresholds out to 2030 now.
So you were referencing 90 agencies with Senator Chandler, but it's nothing like 90 agencies.
So there may be 90 entities that are using SAP,
but some of them have shared.
There will not be. I think I'm happy to take it on notice, but my general understanding there was about 35 instances of SAP, production instances of SAP.
Right.
I will take that on notice.
So of that 35, 20 or so are using legacy ERPs, is that right?
So there's a large degree of variations, and there's different support horizons for all of them. So at the lowest level is SAP ECC 6, which runs out of general support in December 2027.
Right.
That's the one that we have the extension through.
Right.
There are instances of SAP HANA, so they have a technical number, and I think the number is 2208. Which runs out of support in the end of 2029, I think the number is. And again, I'm happy to take these on notices. And then the most contemporary version is 2308, and it has it doesn't have an expiry date as at this point.
Okay. Hume, I had a couple of minutes of questions as well,
Okay.
so I just wanted to
I've got
draw
another
that to your
5 minutes or
attention
so.
that you're able to finish
Yep.
those.
So, noting that obviously that it depends on the scale of the department, it depends on the individual use cases. Do you have any idea of the total cost and cost per department for migrating off the legacy SAP ERP systems to the cloud-supported system?
So as part of our work in our forward planning around that space, we have got some projections from some agencies. The difficulty associated with that is that in some cases those agencies haven't decided on their destination ERP.
Right.
So there is a lot of ambiguity in those. There are a couple of entities that are reasonably advanced in their planning, and we've got some indicative numbers, but it's important to note that my understanding is no budget approvals for ERPs have gone through directly in our process.
Right.
So, Senator, it'll depend on the complexity within the ERP environments, the time frames, the cutovers, what they're moving from and to, because you can go to cloud, you can go versions in between. So it is dependent on a case-by-case basis.
So do you sort of grid this out? Have you got, a great big spreadsheet that says, here are all the agencies, and here's what they're using, here's where they're switching, their timeline by which they need to switch to, here's potentially a blank column as to what they're going to switch to, all that sort of stuff?
Lucy Paul, General Manager, Strategy Planning and Performance. What you've just described is the process that we're currently undertaking with agencies via the COO Committee, the Chief Operating Officers Committee. So that is exactly what we plan to be developing over the coming months.
Right. So,
Senator, I might just add something.
Yep.
You asked about general scale. Well, there are a small number of agencies that are at massive scale. So you would obviously know about Department of Defence and the estimates in that particular one, but you have Services Australia, the Taxation Office, Home Affairs, and DFAT are probably our largest and most complex ones. There is also the aspect that many of those entities, ATO and Services Australia especially, embed SAP into their frontline operations. So Services Australia, for instance, runs their customer relationship management and payment gateways for their social services payments through SAP. ATO has deep integrations into revenue collection, which is part of their core purpose. So it's not just their core financials, their HR, their legal. In some cases, entities have got, and in fact, I think Home Affairs integrates parts of immigration into their SAP solution. So there is a very large and complex environment, and part of the things that we're looking at doing is supporting agencies in simplifying their ERP environment so that we don't run into another support cliff as we've run into with this right now. So by standardising the use of the application, so going back to the core capabilities and not extending them, which was commonplace in the 80s and 90s when most of these were designed, means that they're easier to implement, easy to keep current, and potentially also easy to switch between ERP solutions. So we believe that the planning work on this is setting us up to not repeat the problems that we've had with very large, complex, monolithic ERP solutions being delivered in agencies and being very difficult to transition out.
That the sort of the gridding of that process, which obviously, as you're right, Ms. Pauls, it must be an enormous undertaking. Is there part of that that is in any way sensitive that you couldn't share with the committee?
So I think we'd have to come back to you on that aspect. Part of the sequencing benefit is that we're able to collect an understanding of the procurement implications, and so therefore if there are opportunities for us to be able to bundle approaches to market and make best use of our buying power, we will do so. So to the extent that that's not going to impact on any future negotiations, of course we would make that available.
Terrific. Do you anticipate any departments requiring additional period of maintenance, that 2% or 2.5%, which you're going to get back to me on as to what that is? Can you accurately forecast who might need that and who might take that up?
So yes? I think probably in that particular case that we're looking at alternatives. So there was a fairly recent response put into the media by SAP, but consistent with our understanding that there is not really a capability for SAP to extend beyond the extended maintenance that they've offered us due to some underpinning technologies in their environment that they believe are impossible to negotiate that. What we may have to do in some cases with agencies is have them take an interim step where they move into a technically different environment, but basically utilise the same version that they've got. So it's sort of like abstracting it from that particular version, but that would, again, incur an additional expense as a transition step. Right. But it actually may be a safety mechanism for agencies that can't handle the complexity of that migration.
I've just got about 2 more questions on this, Chair, and then I'm done. So
2 more minutes.
I've
been very generous.
We'll keep going
with the
until
call.
we're done, I'm assuming.
Well,
so
no, Senator Hume, I have indicated that I would like the call. You've had the call for most of the evening, and we have said we would finish at 11. Well, I'll take. Well,
so the multiple departments.
Senator Hume, will you finish by 11?
Well, if you stop interrupting,
I won't take the call if you're prepared to.
Oh, for heaven's sakes!
Finish at 11. I do not think you're being reasonable given how much time you've had today. So I just ask you to be polite and courteous at this time of the evening.
Thank you. Multiple departments are moving to that cloud-based system at the same time, and obviously that creates an alternative. The potential problem might be a bottleneck in terms of support and expertise to undertake that work. Is that something that is planned out as part of that grid process?
Yes, Minister. Yes, Senator. Yes. The concern that the DTA has is that we've got too many transitions occurring at the same time, which not just creates bottlenecks but also has an impact on the availability of the technical talent that's needed to aid the projects.
Right.
And Senator, just to extend on that, that 2027 deadline doesn't apply just to government agencies, it applies worldwide to SAP, including dozens, hundreds, even thousands of companies that are also going to be competing with those resources for that same cliff edge.
Minister, is this provisioned for this migration? Is that provisioned in the budget?
In relation to a particular program?
Well, all of the
Sorry.
agencies clearly are undertaking this transition. Is there a sort of specific provisioning somewhere that I haven't identified, or is it a general department by department provisioning?
Yes, well, I mean, if agency, some of them will be expected to deal with the costs through the normal departmental expenses and the indexation arrangements, but if there's supplementary costs as those agencies work through that, then that's something that government would have to consider, I imagine.
Obviously, if this is a cost that we know about, because obviously SAP have publicly announced it, but no funding's been provisioned, should it be in the statement of risks?
That's probably a question you should have, it's a matter for finance about what goes into the statement of risks.
It's the finance minister, would you know?
Yeah, well, I'm usually advised about what matters need to go into the statement of risks.
I'm assuming it'll be in PFO.
Well, I mean, if there are obviously if there's going to be required supplementation over and above what departments are already funded, then that would have to be a future decision of government.
It's not.
I don't know if Ms. Poole can answer.
DTA.
If Ms. Poole can answer anything more.
So, Senator, I think per the advice we've already given, it's pretty early days, and the work is progressing currently to determine the extent to which current budgets may or may not be able to be utilised for the purposes of the transition. So at this stage, it's not possible to determine whether or not and who or which agency would be seeking additional funding.
And Senator, we have had direct conversation with the agencies that are exploring migrations about mechanisms to support self-funding of those as well. So there are agencies that are directing or redirecting funds from other purposes into this uplift. And the less technically complex those migrations are, the more likely they'll be able to fit into a standard pattern, and that those execution costs are much lower. So okay. I think the aspect of the cloud deployments and the enrolment in cloud solutions has a lower level of complexity than historically the locally installed, locally configured versions of SAP.
Okay, so some departments and agencies are doing it.
Thank you, Senator Hume. We are now due to close the hearing. I'm just going to put my question on.
Chair, not all agencies are on SAP. Costs will vary. Support is being provided. Agencies are supplemented through indexation arrangements about how to meet some of those costs.
That's right.
And if there are future decisions, future governments need to be made, they would be made down the track.
I just quickly want to put my question on notice, if I may, which is that the DTA, I understand you make platforms and tools that help government agencies deliver digital services. We have a national priority in preventing family and sexual and domestic violence, of course. I've recently participated in the Corporations Committee inquiry on financial abuse in Australia, and it really highlighted how both private sector corporations but also government digital platforms and the policies that sit behind them can add to the perpetuation of financial and other forms of exploitation. So I really wanted to ask you how you might go about embedding that safety by design in your advice to government agencies.
And I'm sure we can provide an answer to that on notice, Senator.
Thank you. We are now adjourned, and we will meet again on Friday. Thank you.